There we go. So again, good evening to the Maynard Finance Committee meeting for January 9th. And today we are joined also by the school committee. They will be opening up their meeting as well. Before we get started, want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, and therefore please take care not to share anything on your screen that you don't want captured by the recording. Also, all votes taken this evening will be done by a roll call vote. And I need to confirm that all of my members at least, and then I'll let the school committee do theirs, are present, can hear me and participate remotely. So Ken, starting with you.
Yep.
Katie?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Kevin? You're muted, Kevin, try again. Just so we know you work.
Yes.
There we go. Okay.
I got two mute buttons and I had one on.
And Lori, I'll do you for my end.
Yes.
Okay. And I do not believe Jillian's here yet, or oh, is that you, Jillian?
I am here.
Okay, there it is.
I'm signed
Sorry.
in on, I could only sign in on my phone, so
That's
I'm
fine.
having problems technically.
No problem. Glad you're here. Okay, so that's it for the finance committee. So Natasha, I'll let you go ahead and do the school committee.
Okay, I think Brian, you and Colleen, the only two from the staff that'll be joining, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so Brian, I can hear you. Colleen?
Yes.
All right, Mary Branley?
Yes, and I just saw from Hillary that she's not going to join us. Just so
Okay.
you know.
All right, Elizabeth Albota?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Natasha Rivera, yes. And then just to make note, Colleen, when Mauro joins, if you could just make note of that, and that Hillary will not be attending.
Okay.
Right.
So the first item on our agenda this evening is a discussion with the school department concerning their budget presentation for FY24. Brian, do you or someone from the school committee, do you want me to share, or do you want to share? How do you want to do the look of it? Do you want me to?
You can, or Colleen can. Usually Colleen just kind of pulls it up and shares it, but if you have the budget presentation, either way.
Okay, I can, unless Colleen, you would rather. Does it matter to you?
I have it ready to go if it's up to you.
Oh, okay, great. Let me just make sure that I have the right permissions for you. I always forget. You think I would, like 2 years in, this would be something normal.
It's under screen.
Under
it's
Sheen Scare. There it
yeah.
is. Yep, there it is. Okay, you should be all set now, Colleen.
Okay, thank you.
Brian,
So
you want to start with this or you want to start at the beginning?
we'll go, well, let me ask. I'm assuming you've all seen this presentation at some point because it's been at 2 school committee meetings. It's been at a town budget subcommittee meeting. It's not new news. I'm happy to start at the beginning and go through slide by slide or get to the meat of it. Do you have a preference?
Let me throw it out to my committee.
Okay.
We were given this via email, but other than that, I don't know that
I
all
can
of my
walk through
committee
it
has
kind of
sort of
quickly,
seen
to be
it.
honest.
So yeah, maybe just the quick walkthrough
Sure.
at the beginning, and
Why don't
then
we start at the beginning?
get to the
Colleen?
meat.
That's fine. Yep, I have no problem with it. I hope you like the roller coaster because that was the one and done. It's gone. Colleen. And then we get to the purpose of our budget, which is to recommend a fiscally responsible budget that in our mind maintains our services and moves the school district forward while also aligning with our strategic plan and the town master plan. Then we get to the leadership team, which is a list of sort of the central office folks, myself, Wayne, Jeff, Chuck, Adam, and then we get to principal levels. We have the principals of each of the buildings: Elizabeth York, Olga Doktorov, Mike Barth, David Snyder, Rob Rulo, Karen Lindquist, and special projects, Charles Gobran, and facilities manager of building operations, Bob Savoy. So it's a very inclusive process. Then we get to our strategic plan, and you can see the budget itself supports supporting all students. So it supports our plan of developing global citizens, superior academic experience, and inclusive practices that support all students. And then our overview, so it gets a little repetitive here, but just reminding you that it does connect to our strategic plan, to the town master plan, and had input not only from those people that were listed, but also school councils, staff, additional financial data from the town, conversations with Greg, and then state information as well. So these are some of the key elements within the town master plan. So obviously it's a 200+ page document. We don't apply all of that to us, but there's a section, public facilities and services, PFS 6, support a high quality education system. And these are some of the elements where we think we align with that. Specifically, for example, PFS 2, we continue to work to increase our programming to support students with resiliency and mental health issues. That's kind of an outcome of the pandemic, if you will, but it's in alignment with the town master plan. Then we get to go on to this fun slide, which on email, it's probably not nearly as fun, but in person, if you click on any one of those, it hyperlinks you to, for example, FY19, what salaries, expenses, and total budget were, and then it takes you up through FY20, and you can see the increase and the percentage increase. So as Colleen's going through that, you can take a look at that. And you also have these pages after the roller coaster to go back and refer to. And then on a nice graph, if you will, because I'll give Wayne credit. He likes graphs. I like graphs. He helps me with this. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here today. Otherwise, you'd see his smiling face as well. So one of the things you'll see is that we took this dip in FY23. So our overall ask, which for FY24, which is 5.4%, which I think that might seem high. I think if you look at the trajectory back from FY20 and moving forward, it's really on par between year to year. We're in that 4 or 5 range every year, except last year we took a big dip, and that was pandemic related. There were a lot of programs that didn't run, etc. So now we'll get to the meat of where we started, and that is our proposed budget is $22,845,577, which includes all of our operating expenses, maintains current staffing and programming within the operational budget, and it includes 2 asks. One for the district to improve overall operations, and one to increase student learning time at the Green Meadow Elementary School. We do have, just to be clear, when we're talking operating budget versus ESSER funded positions, that amount is operating budget. I'm like pointing my pen at you. I don't mean to. Not all the grant funded positions. We have several positions that are funded by ESSER that at some point, either this year, we may be able to carry 1 or 2 of them forward next year, but those will stop. But that's a known entity. That's not a new or a decrease in, if you will, within this budget. So they're separate. The level service budget, go back one more. So the one in the middle, the 22,744, that's more than just contractual obligations, if you will. It does include all of that, but it's also the transportation, the utilities, the facilities, the maintenance, the technology, the curriculum, the professional development, special education expenses, stipends, athletics. It's the full programming of Maynard Public Schools. So it's not just salaries for teachers and paraprofessionals, administrators, et cetera. It's all inclusive there. Now the town, in speaking with Greg, I was kind of surprised, but he's not him personally. I sound like I'm saying Greg personally. The town administrator has recommended 22,316,400, which is a significant reduction. And this is what I really hope people start to understand. It's a significant reduction from level services. So take ESSER and put it aside. It doesn't really matter. Those are a few, it does matter. We appreciate them. They do a great job, But in terms of our overall, all of our teachers, paraprofessionals, everything I just talked about, transportation, curriculum, professional development, that's that operating budget, $428,000 less compared to what we have this year, and our student numbers are not going down. We just had 2 more kids start today. So that's a really big reduction for us. It's kind of funny. In some districts, you have like a store, right? I just tell you this because I've worked in places where you have like an entire room that's full of supplies. It's kind of like a mini Office Max, if you will. When you need things, you go in there, and there's probably legitimately thousands and thousands of dollars there. Yeah, we don't operate like that. If we need like legal paper or regular, yeah, we order it when we need it. So we don't have papers and pencils that we're going to be able to allocate as reductions for that amount. That starts and ends at staff. And that's a big number for us. So we're really hoping to show the town that we need more than a 3% increase, because that's what that number is. That's just, quite frankly, it's not adequate for what I think what the town wants and the services that we provide to, the 1,200 students. The difference, which now I can't see, is, so the 529 is really our ask. So as we continue, I'm going to share what our asks are, because I think they're important, because we really definitely need them. So this is a breakdown of that big number. So the budget drivers, this puts some numbers to all of those categories that I just talked about. So you can see them. I won't read them all to you. You have this. You do have this, right, Alana? Like you all have a hard copy of this.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was in an email
yeah,
shared.
yeah.
Okay, as long as you all have it, I just want to make sure you, for reference sake.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So this is was an ad from the very original version this year, but it's nice to show that, I think it's nice to show that we are making efforts and putting resources into our buildings and grounds, because that's always kind of, in the short time I've been here, that's sort of been the grumbling, like the schools don't always necessarily take care of their things as well as they should. And I think this shows that we are trying to take care of our buildings, grounds, facilities as best as we can, but that also costs us significant resources. So as much as we want to do that, and we continue to do that, it costs more and more each year. And we continue to do that. Some school council requests that came out this year. So these really come from students and then from the school council at each building. The whole idea of increasing social emotional supports, restorative practices, and I could read this whole page, but I will say the administration has worked really hard to try and incorporate as many of these as they can in a budget neutral way. The Fowler School, again, so now we're talking about one of their asks was a math specialist. Increasing music a tiny amount, which is kind of, so we've actually figured out, can we reallocate some things to do that? Because it doesn't sound like a big ask, because we already have somebody who's at a 0.8, which is 80% of a full-time position, but to make them a complete full-time position frees up your schedule. And when you're trying to move classes around and give kids opportunities, that becomes a really big deal. And we're able to do that piece. Green Meadow, again, more and more technology is involved in education. So having an integration specialist, a lot of schools have those. So that's an ask. The multi-tiered systems of support teachers, those are currently funded through, for the most part, ESSER. So the interesting thing about this is, so what it allows is for those teachers to do, and they've listed them. So if you're in education, especially elementary education, you recognize early bird, DRA, DIBELS, that kind of goes up through partway through middle school. Those are assessments, and you do them on kids. You do them multiple times a year, really to identify growth and or not. And then you want to put in resources to support those kids to help them make the growth they need. So if we have people that are able to do those assessments that are either funded from the operating budget and or ESSER grant funded, it means that the teachers don't have to stop teaching and do those assessments. And it sort of directly impacts how much time kids have on learning. It increases their time on learning, and it gets those assessments done in a very timely way. The other ask on here has to do with the The number 2 would be the part-time lunch recess monitors, because that allows our teachers not to have to do that. And it increases the time that they have throughout their day to provide direct instruction. And
Brian.
Yes.
Just real quick to mention, because I think I heard this earlier in the year, but the assessment piece at the elementary, those were, correct me if I'm wrong, increase the mandated frequency in years by the state, right? Because they are requiring some additional, so it's, I know at one point it was just like kindergarten, but now it's expanded up into different grades that they required. And it's also frequency and how many times a year that it's being done. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we do most of those at least 2, if not 3 times a year. Because we
Okay.
really want, so they typically are phonics, phonemic awareness, and reading. So we really want to assess kids as early as possible, frequently, to make sure that they are making growth. And if they're not, we put in additional supports to support them.
I remember that.
And
I
if-
think the dyslexia guidance that has kind of evolved in the past couple years has outlined a framework just to enhance those assessments, which is
Absolutely.
great. But yeah, like you mentioned, it does require more data collection, more oversight in order to do so.
Correct. Thanks for pointing that out. Then our 2 additional asks would be a district level clerical support person. So this actually existed for those of you that have been around long enough or involved in sort of school committee, finance committee. You probably know that this position was there. Ken probably knows that because it's probably during his time on school committee. So it existed. None of these jobs have gone away or requirements of what needs to get done. We've just managed to get by without having that person supporting. So right now, when we talk about human resources, transportation, all those types of things, that's all becomes where she's on screen. That's Colleen. And there's really little support for backup for her. So this job would support her in terms of transportation. It would also support, and I think the role that was there also supported the special education office. So that's Medicaid, maintaining documentation for circuit breaker, filing, reviewing IEPs. So not writing IEPs, that's the teachers and chairs, et cetera. But really there's so much work in the background that has to get done. And then as time has gone on, athletics have just expanded. So we've gone this year, finally, to an electronic payment system, but it still requires tracking. How many kids are participating in what sport are they participating in? Have they paid? So we're trying to make it easier for parents to pay the fee, but we still need to track it and we still need to remind them. So this one position is really intended to support 3 different departments, sort of Colleen being the superintendent's administrative assistant and those roles, special education with Jeff and Rhonda, and athletics with Mike. And one of the pieces on here, sort of the number 1 bullet when it talks about Medicaid complete quarterly reports, that's bringing in a significant amount of money to the town. And I get it's part of the big puzzle, but it's bringing in well over $100,000 and it's becoming a pretty consistent basis. They've changed their model, so they're reimbursing more. We're working hard to make sure that we're asking as many people as possible to participate, to fill out the paperwork, to submit it, to get those reimbursements. And in this case, and this is true everywhere, those reimbursements go directly to the town. Some towns, that's just the way it is. So the fact that we're doing all that work doesn't seem unreasonable to ask for some support to continue to be able to do that to the best of our ability and potentially even increase how much Medicaid sends back to the town. So anyway, that's one of our asks. And then the other one goes back to the lunch recess monitors at Green Meadow that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. By not having our staff have to do that, if you will, our teachers, it adds 90 hours of instructional time per year for students. So it's additional time that they're in the classroom. It's a little bit less transition time. It allows us to change the schedule, quite frankly, and keeps us in compliance with all of the pieces of who does what, when, why, where within Green Meadow. So there's an expense to it, but we think we can make that work. Now we get to the fancy charts. People love pie charts. The nice thing about pie charts visually, when I look at them is the major pieces of that pie. So the blue, the red, the gray, the green, the dark, that makes up probably certainly the majority. I think it's like 94% of the pie or so. And you can see that that really is Green Meadow, Fowler, the Fowler School, Maynard High School, and special education. So I like that because to me, it's just a nice reminder that everything we're doing and so much of it goes right back to the students and staff. And that's sort of the point of this. There's not really new information here. Again, and I think this one just breaks it down into percentages so that you can really see that it actually is 94%. And it really goes back to, again, it goes back to the kids, it goes back to the teachers. And then there's just some services that support that around it, the superintendent office, the school committee. We're small little pieces of this puzzle. But the majority of it is the buildings and the special education going right back to the students. It's Colleen. Then sort of we look ahead, and this is kind of increase opportunities for students, their choice, their voice, reminding them. Some of them sort of get it when they get to high school that they are actually, if they do really well, they can take college credit bearing coursework in high school. Every now and then we have a kid who like just masters this and they graduate high school with an associate degree. That's sort of way up there, but it's very reasonable that many, many kids, I would say most high school kids could graduate with one, if not two or three college level courses and having gotten credit for that. We also are looking at our pathways. You know, we have WAVM, business and DECA, computer science, and just really expanding those and clarifying those for students. And then we're also looking at sort of building that up, the computer science and career exploration within Fowler to lead to the high school. So the kids actually see the connection between Fowler and the high school, whether it's WAVM, whether it's computer science or business and DECA. I mean, it could be performing arts, any of those, but the stronger connection there is, the more likely it is that we'll keep those kids. So we've worked really hard this year on a side note of doing parent forums and really getting the word out there about everything the high school has to offer to our really as down as 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, not just 8th grade, but going down so they really see the reason like, hey, I should stay here. There's a lot of advantages to being at Maynard High School. So we're excited about that. Again, this is just reminding you that this is our maintenance of effort budget. It's tied to all the different indicators, the strategic plan, the town master plan. It was an inclusive process, etc. And that is our ask, which is, that's our ask, period. And it's a good ask. It is not, and I will say, we really work hard not to come to you with a budget and an ask that is everything we could possibly want and try and play this negotiation game. We really work hard to say, what do we need? What do we want versus what do we need? And you saw some of our wants. And we've tried to really focus that and narrow that to what do we need to move us forward. That's it.
All right, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of this budget from last year, I was looking back and some of the things, there are a couple of the same asks that I believe you weren't able to do last year, one being the clerical help, and I believe the recess assistance, but there were the athletic director, the athletic trainer, and several other things I know that were potentially on the chopping block due to not getting your full ask last year, but those were able to be funded not through ESSER because they're permanent, right?
Yep.
There's no athletic trainer right now.
No trainer,
They're
just the director.
the
Athletic
director, right?
Okay.
And so if you remember back, so it's kind of it's not a long story, it's a short story, but the way they used to do the athletic director, there was a teacher who did it. So they got their teacher's salary. If this is coming back to you, just say, stop, I remember this. But the delta between a full-time AD as just a single position, and then the way we used to do it with a stipend and an offset, that delta was $16,000. And just through reallocation, we were able to, with Wayne's help, identify several different pots that we could take a total of $16,000 and know that we would have a full-time AD And quite frankly, it's paid off because this is our second year, but we have a full blown winter track program with 35 plus, maybe even a little bit more boys and girls, athletes. And they're competing and that's the kind of thing that if you don't have a full-time AD, it's hard to do.
Right.
Alana, just want to
Mhm.
add, because it came up actually at the student representatives report at our last school committee meeting. And it also was brought up in their SAC meeting last week. They are strongly advocating for an athletic trainer for a whole host of reasons. For one, just their own overall well-being and bounce back, I guess, from injury and how they can be more supported. Also, the context of just MIAA and the rules around all those areas that seem to be very concerning for families and students right now in those arenas. So I just wanted to highlight because it was part of their unsolicited request that a concern that the students have right now.
Okay. And ESSER 3 is this year. We're in ESSER 3, is that correct?
Correct.
FY23 is ESSER 3, and that's 1.5 million. It's the biggest one.
Correct.
Do you have any, do you know where that's going to go this year?
Yes, we know where all of that's going. I don't actually have
Okay.
a slide on that, but we just kept that. So to answer your question, yes, we do know exactly. The school committee knows where it's allocated and how it's allocated. We didn't choose to put that into the budget presentation, but I could certainly share that with you all. We just
Also, I don't
kept
think
it
it's
separate
not
from operating.
1.5. It's not 1.5 million this year. Also, it was the whole. So ESSER 3, we had to tap into it last year, and it started. It started being used for those MTSS teachers. There was a whole what came out last year. It will end earlier than anticipated because we had to fund the benefits from those positions instead of those. And I think that came out to originally like 800,000. So we had 800,000 of that had to go towards benefits for staff.
Okay.
So virtually the money is still being used for the MTSS staff, correct, Brian?
Correct. It's supporting the MTSS staff, a guidance counselor, custodian, nurse. We have that. We just, because it's grant funded, we didn't want to sort of muddy the waters with operating budget versus grant budget, if you will.
Right. No, but I'm just in terms of I guess looking ahead and what that's doing for us this year versus the fact it won't be there next year. And I was just curious as to what exactly it was funding.
Oh, yeah.
But
If I
that's
could,
helpful.
I wanted to make just a general comment that you saw the graph, which to me is the best sheet in the whole presentation. It really showed that the last 2 years dip is really what has done us in. And if we had 800,000 for the last 3 years, we wouldn't be asking for the 1.79 right now. So these last 2 years have really been, not a great thing for the schools. Just wanted to bring that up.
And what I guess specifically, I know I see the ask for this year, which is like the resource for the recess teachers and the clerical help and such. Last year, again, there was the athletic director that was able to be funded. So I guess my question is what else was either decided not to be done, or what do you think with that? Like the money's, it's a figure, sure, that, but I'm more curious about like what the impact was in terms of staff and or programming.
I can answer one thing and then
Sure.
So in 2020, FY 2020, I think it was FY 2020 when Brian started, we negotiated the MEA contract, and that contract will end is it
June 30th.
next June 30th, or to be honest there, FY 24 will start the negotiation for that. That contract was able to be negotiated below, I think it was 1.75% increase every year for the MEA, which is the largest, expense. I could say with certainty, and our administrators have been taking only they're taking the same raise that the teachers have had. So they've had 1.75 or 1.1% raise every year. I can tell you as one person, and I'm pretty sure that given the landscape of our society's inflation and demands of people, that is not a sustainable way to, to support our teachers. Will not be able to, a contract probably will be very much not going to be having a 1.75 in the near future. We also have custodian contracts that are coming up on the horizon. So just all of those, Brian's here, but his contract is up for negotiation. So I just, those are benefits and wages are the largest expense. And so I just want to make sure we're being realistic on what we have ahead.
And sorry, those contracts are for FY24. They're coming under negotiation. Is that what you said?
They will start in FY24.
Okay.
So they have the non-union contracts and Brian starts in FY24. Exactly. And then the teachers will, the MEA starts in FY24. They'll start negotiation. I believe theirs will go
That's
into effect the following July.
Ken, I see
That's
your hand
correct.
up. Go ahead.
He's muted.
So, so my question is a sort of complicated one. I'll go back to the graphic that Mary had talked about, which is slide 14, which is the bar graph that shows the relative increases over the past 4 years plus the proposed. So Mary made a point, which I think is, a valid point. The last couple of years, the amount of increase has gone down. So I guess the question I have is a rather complex one, because I'm wondering aloud, a town meeting voter looking at this graphic, if they were to say, well, I realize the town contribution the percentage increase has gone down, but the town has continued to increase its percentage, has made increases, although at a lower rate, particularly in the last 2 years. However, the school system got a lot of outside funding, having to do with, COVID and so forth. And again, I'm speaking not so much, anybody who's on this call, but the average town meeting voter. If they were to look at this and then sort of reassure themselves, oh yeah, but the school's got a whole bunch of COVID funding. Would that be an accurate reaction?
So I think it's a great question, and I agree it's complicated. And I think for your average person, so not the people on this screen, because I think the people on this screen understand the difference between grant funded and if you were to use those funds, the ESSER money, which there was a lot of ESSER money, if you were to use those, have used those for salaries and benefits and things like that for existing staff, you hit a financial cliff that you probably can't recover from, which I know everybody here gets. So we didn't do that. So we made positions that were valuable, but they were time sensitive. So we knew they'd last 1 or 2 years. We didn't use any of that money to offset things like salaries of existing staff or union negotiations with any of our units. So to your point, we probably need to make sure that people understand exactly what the ESSER funds were spent for, how they were spent, and the time that they were spent within and when they actually expire. So it's
Right,
not even like we could say we could keep that money and we're going to spend it over the next 10 years.
Brian, also, isn't it very, like, it had to be somewhat COVID related, just like the ARPA funds? Like, it wasn't something that we could just put towards our general contract anyway for our expenses that had to be something to do with COVID impact. So education, learning, regression, like there were some areas of, or
Right, it's-
facilities. I know there was like facilities, infrastructure for air, whatever that might be. I don't.
That's true, but I think you could, I don't know that it would have been difficult to word it
We wanted
such
to,
that-
if we,
Right. And I think there were a lot of people that, I think there were a lot of districts that combined operating and grant money. So to Ken's point, I think it's important to just make sure that your average person understands what ESSER was for, when it was, and we have that. And you've seen those charts of, it started on this date, it ended on this date, it was X amount of dollars, and this is what it was approved for.
Yeah,
So
I
that-
mean, I
think-
guess I'm going back to a statement that Mary made, which I think there's some validity to, but I think, again, the average town meeting voter is probably not going to find that as compelling that, over the last couple of years, the school budget has gone up, not as much as we'd like to. But, okay, so for a long time, I'd been sort of advocating that it would be nice to have sort of a trend line of the school budget going up, as well as what the level of service would have been over time, to say nothing about the additional things that the school system needed. And so if you look at the delta, the difference between what the actual budget growth has been over time versus what level service has been over time versus what level service plus, basic, asks that you put in, that gap continues to widen over time. And yet I think, a town meeting voter looking at this chart would sit there and say, well, the town's been increasing its contribution. Yeah, it didn't increase it very much over the last couple of years, but frankly, I didn't see a whole lot of growth in my salary, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to convey to town meeting voters what the actual impact is. And so, there's a gap that builds over time as each year you don't get what your ask is, and then the percentage is based on not your last year's ask, but on your last year's budget. And so you ask for this, you actually get this. You ask for this, you actually get this. You ask for that, you actually get this. And so that sawtooth, chart that goes up just continues to widen the gap. And so each year, the school system, from a budget perspective, falls a little farther and farther behind, but that's not really conveyed on this chart. What's conveyed on this chart is, town is increasing its town contribution each year. And so the average town meeting voter isn't really understanding the impact. Now, the second point I guess I would make is that you made a statement on an earlier chart where you were, let me make sure I'm, well, you had talked about the fact that there would be budget cuts. I think I want to say,
$428,000.
yeah, I'm trying to figure,
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what chart that is. Oh, that's the next chart, chart 15. So
Yes.
you say this requires a significant reduction in services.
Yes.
And I know, again, from having been on school committee, one, you can't say what those are because you don't know what those reduction in services are. And there's lots of reasons why you don't know that. And even if you did know that, you couldn't say it. But again, town meeting voter sees something like that and says, hey, look, I've had to tighten my belt. Okay, so I guess the school system going to have to do that. They don't really, I don't know that town meeting voters will find this kind of thing, as compelling. Even if you were to able to put out some general statements around, what you realistically might do in terms of, if you're, obviously if there's staff reductions, then that would increase the, class sizes, it would decrease, services that we might have, specials or whatever. So I guess those are just two comments that I look at this. Again, I think everybody on this call probably understands the details. Just saying town meeting voters, I don't know that, I don't know that they're gonna understand this and find that compelling. So I'll just leave it at that.
Kevin, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. So I have a rather complex question, but just to point out the relevance. So the FinCom has this McCarthy model. My committee should be familiar with it. And just a very concerning fact is that our fastest growing expense in town is actually charter school reimbursements, which have grown at a compound average rate since 2019 at 17.7%. The second fastest growing expense is school choice, which is growing at a compound annual average rate of 15.6%. So these are rapidly growing costs. And in fact, even if you net out the Chapter 70 education funding and the charter school reimbursement, even that net is losing roughly, let me get the number here, is losing roughly let me get that right there, is losing 3.38% per year. And that's even net the state funding and the charter school reimbursement. If you were to work out that percentage, that is going by our FY 2023, we probably lost $135,037 last year going out to the charter schools. So I don't think I'm being alarmist when I say that our town is hemorrhaging money to the charter schools, and it's continuing to grow, and the problem is only going to get worse. And my concern, if we do service cuts, is that we risk what is known actually in the financial industry as a death spiral, where if we cut services, we're going to induce more parents to go to the charter schools, which is going to increase our charter school assessment, which is then going to further degrade our budget, which is going to lead to, going by past behavior, more school budget cuts. And that just makes the problem worse and worse. And so this problem could rapidly get out of our control if we don't get a handle on it. So my question to the school committee is of the unfunded items that you're asking for, what can you do to reduce the charter school assessment, to incentivize parents to keep their children inside the Maynard public school system?
I'll take that if you want me to. So Kevin, you're speaking to the choir, and it's usually us that is having this conversation. So it's really great to have somebody from the finance committee have the conversation, because you're right. I mean, unfortunately, the education has become a business, and it's taken us a long time to grapple with that, because it's fairly new because of the charter schools and how much emphasis they put on marketing. And I will say that our principals have been starting to do, under the direction of Superintendent Haas, have been starting to do a phenomenal job of marketing. And for instance, there's on Thursday night, there's a Zoom meeting of our presentation on all the great things that the high school has to offer. And it's specifically for Fowler and even elementary school parents. They've been doing more and more of those things, and we're not waiting until, because in the last couple of years, we had been doing them in like March and April, which is too late because parents have made the decision by then. But we're doing them now earlier, and we were even doing them before the holidays and that. So they're really trying to get parents to understand all of the great advantages of having their children stay in Maynard. But it won't be overnight. But I will say that an awful lot of work is being done now to try to counteract that.
And I just want to add also to that, Mary, to that at the SAC committee meeting for the students, one of the concerns they expressed was that their AP classes, they just have a lot of students in them. And a lot of that is, there's so much we can do with the staff. So imagine, that's when you start thinking about, staff cutting, you're increasing class sizes or you're dropping offerings. And some of that, unfortunately would impact potentially what students would or what families are looking to do. Right now, I think the direction that has been playing out in the goals is expanding those pathways, is investing in the DECA program. I know that has been something that's really energized a lot of the students and and families and the school, and I would hate to see that those opportunities diminish. I think also one of the asks on the budget about having staff for lunch to help with that increases that instruction time, reducing transitions at the elementary school, which we all know is so fundamentally important to help with a learning experience at that age. Having too many transitions to different classes is, really everyone, I mean, on a personal level, I can speak to it, but I know everyone knows that, that it's very anxiety provoking for kids in that elementary school. Having more access to those core curriculum subject matters will better prepare them for when they're getting to that Fowler grade. More access to math, more access to science, more access to English and ELA, whatever it is that they need to do, more even just recess, moving around, so they can self-regulate a little bit better and perform better in a better academic environment.
So I just want to correct Mary a little bit. It's not just me saying this. This is literally like an objective financial analysis that you would do for any organization. So like one of the typical analysis you do is you go look at the line items and you say, okay, what are the fastest growing line items? And of course, I didn't go looking for school choice. It just naturally jumped out from the numbers as objectively being the fastest growing thing. And so all those numbers are very objective, that anyone could go take this spreadsheet. Any member of our committee can go take the spreadsheet and verify for themselves. The only thing that I would add is just a little bit of color about the death spiral. I mean, that has a little bit of a qualitative aspect to it, but it's fairly well established that if you lower the services delivered while maintaining the same price, and if parents have a choice, naturally, if you lower the services and your competitor, AKA AMSA, and I know we said the schools are a business, so your competitor is going to keep the same level of services, but if you decrease the services, naturally, you're going to logically very assume that more people are going to go to your competitor. And so I think the aspect of a death spiral is also fairly well established and fairly objective to see.
Sorry, Jillian, go ahead. I see your hand up. I don't think you're muted, but I don't hear anything, Jillian. No? All right, I'm going to give you a second. You just keep talking. And if I hear you start talking, then I will come back to you, okay?
Madam Chair, I do have a follow-up question.
Okay, hold on. Because I have something to follow up on yours. I do agree that charter school costs are going up. I don't quite agree with the exact line of logic in terms of the spending, only because, and I know it's different because obviously a charter school is different than a whole district, but AMSA spends, this is 2021, AMSA spends $16,675 per student, and ours was over 20. on this particular profile for Mass DOE. So $20,901 per student. I agree that charter school spending is a problem. I personally don't think the way that we fund them at all is right. And that it should like that the towns should be responsible for all of it. I think it's too hard for towns to be able to fund their own schools and alternatives. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. So yeah, I mean, I don't, but it is, I mean, but it is what it is right now, until we can change that politically. And
Well,
hopefully there is.
So Alana, there's a couple things that have to be put into context. There are a lot of things in the per student cost or spending for charter schools that isn't in the per student cost of public schools. So they have to provide their own buildings and things like that. So, so they don't have, they don't have MSBA money coming in and things like that. So it is difficult to try to compare the per student cost in a charter school with per student cost in a public school. So, I think, the problem is not so much that there are charter schools or school choice. And there are people who complain about people going to Assabet Valley. The problem is not so much the fact that there are charter schools, but there are people going to the charter schools because there's a perception that that's where they're going to get a better education. Now, most people on this call know that, my daughters went to charter schools for a couple of years and then came back to Maynard public schools and had a fine education and one that we're very happy with. But there still is a perception out there that that you can go to a charter school and get a better better education. And the thing that Kevin was asking about in terms of what is the school system going to do to try to keep people who otherwise would stay in the school system from leaving and going to a charter school. That is a valid question to be asked, and it was a valid question when we started asking this years ago. With all due respect, I was talking about charter school funding leaving our district many years ago. And so the question that Kevin is asking is a question I asked a long time ago, and we're still not around to answering it. So.
Okay, well, I'm going to continue on with my thought then, which doesn't, mean that Kevin wasn't, I wasn't entirely correcting everything he was saying. I was just saying that, yes, students leaving the district for charter schools is a problem. Yes, funding charter schools is very much a challenge and also a problem. And I wish it didn't fall on Maynard town shoulders alone, and hoping that there's more relief coming from the state level. But there will always be families who seek alternatives, no matter what district you're in, no matter what rank your schools are in. If there's alternatives to be had, there will people that will seek the alternatives. And I think just to say that it's due to money alone, when you look at our per pupil spending, let's not talk about it to the charter schools. Let's talk about it just in terms of other public districts. It's not at a dire level compared to some of our comparisons. And so I don't think it's fair to just say we're going to start a death spiral due to money alone. I think there's many reasons and many things we can do to keep, talking up our school systems and the wonderful things about our school system. For one, it being a small school system, it being one of the few places around where it's not regionalized. And so if you want a small school environment where, everybody knows you and knows your name, like that would definitely be us. And it's not anywhere else around us. It's not the same. And so I I appreciate the budget that was presented, and I understand the needs as they were presented. And I would love to, be able to say, we could totally give you the $1,000,001 that you are looking for. And I agree that, inflation is high and everybody is aware of that. And I agree that it does not, translate well when you're not giving your staff what you believe they deserve in raises. But I know too that our healthcare costs, our benefits, and it's like 74%, I think, of it that goes to the schools is going to go up again this year as well. And that's another thing we have to balance. And so, I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at what we're going to be able to bring in, and I'm just looking at trying to make our budget work. Aside from what I would love to do, the philosophy and all that stuff, I'm just looking at numbers and trying to see how we can make them work.
So can I respond?
Yeah, do your
Alana?
follow-up, Kevin,
Sure.
and then Jill, we'll try you again.
Okay.
Oh, I hear you this time though. Good.
So just as in response to what you say, I could promise you, the moment parents hear about service cuts, charter schools is going to cross their minds. The moment you say that word, you are going to induce more people to go to the charter schools that would otherwise do so. And that's an increase. Now that is going to further reduce our finances, which is going to lead to an even tougher budget next year. The point is that the funding of schools is not just a cost, it's also a revenue generator. By that money recirculates back into our town by stopping the hemorrhaging to the charter schools. It's not just a cost. People just see the cost and like, oh, the schools, it's not even about who deserves what. It's about trying to grow our pie, or at least trying to keep the pie from shrinking from everybody. Because these charter schools, we don't have control other than the services we choose to provide. We don't have control over the decision. So we could try to cut costs by cutting the services, but what's going to happen? The parents are just going to respond by going to the charter schools and getting a level of service, probably a better level of service than what they would receive from us if we decide to cut these services.
Okay, I'm going to move on
Okay.
to Jillian. Go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yes, now we can. Great.
Hooray. Okay. So I had to call in and out, and I've been having the technology day. So apologies on that. I think, it is something that I know we've talked a lot about in the past. And, I really appreciate everyone being level-headed and calm in these discussions. I think that it has a potential to get, we're all very passionate here. I mean, it is a volunteer position and it's because we care. So, and I think that's great to bring to the table and to show the rest of the town people that we work together with, that we care. We care about the kids, we care about the town, we want things, there are also realities. And I think there will be a ceiling to this so-called death spiral or potential. There's only a certain number of kids that can be accepted into these charter schools, is my understanding, from each town. So there is a ceiling. Whether we can afford that ceiling or not is a different story. So right now, I don't think we're at that ceiling. I think there is still, space there. But I know some of our other neighboring towns are at the ceiling, so they can't contribute any more kids to these certain schools. I don't know about all of them. I'm not an expert in that area. But this is obviously something that eats away at money that we could be using in the town schools. So I just wanted to throw it out there that there is a ceiling to that. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I know we've talked about it in the past, and there's still room, I think. We're not at the ceiling yet. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Jillian. Bob, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
All right, I had to figure out how to unmute again. I just want to make two comments. One is that the model that you referenced, Kevin, if you look at the data, the actual only bright spot in it is that the rate of climb is actually going down. in the last 4 years. It was 25% when it started. And granted, it was a lot less dollar value, and it's still a big problem. But one of the things that you do these analyses for is to say, what should we do about this? Like you've asked, what are we going to do about it? I think you're right about service cuts may force people to think about it. So the kind of effort that I heard is happening tomorrow night or Wednesday night, maybe. Those kinds of things have to be emphasized. They have to be constantly put in front of all year, at least school year long, of what the advantages are. And a number of us in some separate ad hoc groups are trying to do a lot of that, because it really turns out to be hard for either the schools system or the town to go out there and market our town and what's good about it and where we stand in terms of comparison to neighboring school districts and that sort of thing. So I think it's as always, when you have that kind of a line item and you say, that's a bogey that really we have to do something about, we have to really look very carefully at the data and very carefully at what options are available to us. And I think those two comments, I think we want to be careful about how we utilize the numbers, but absolutely look at the biggest bang for the buck in terms of reducing expenses and increasing revenues is the way to go. And some of that, to your point, Kevin, and I totally agree, is that you make sure that people understand what the trend is and what the advantages are to stay. And I think the more we all get on board, and everybody, I mean, volunteers, the school committee, I think that's everyone's job to figure out how to market ourselves better and combat this social media trend toward, doing self-destructing in terms of our own, what's bad about the town versus all the great things that are here. So you'll see a lot more of this coming out as we launch the new town website. A lot of information going to be coming out from the EDC and others in order to attract new businesses that can help us in the tax revenue standpoint and tax base. But it's a multi-pronged approach that won't happen over the course of 1 year, which is why, those of you who've known me for a while know that I want to project a few years out and look for trends that have that positive impact. I hope it's clear that the tool isn't to stop us from investing in our future. It's exactly the opposite. It's trying to figure out where the best investments can be made year to year to year, because it can't happen overnight. All right, enough said.
Thank you, Bob. Kevin, go ahead. You don't say muted, Kevin, but I can't hear you.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
there
I
you
think
go.
I think it's encouraging, Bob, that we did have a down year in charter school, but right now we only have like 3 points of data. That could very well either be due to COVID or just random noise in the process. Like, I think to really do this right, we need many years of data and possibly do a logistic regression, on it to see like where the ceiling is. But I guess in relation to Jillian's comment, my question for the school committee is, do we know what percentage of the cap we are in terms of charter school enrollment? Let's say for each school, ideally, but if not, do we know what percentage of the cap we're at?
That's not data that I have readily handy. I think it has to do with also your performance. There's a formula that's tied how they measure your performance, because if you're underperforming in certain areas, which kind of goes to the MCAS and all those figures, then they increase or they allow the cap to expand a little bit more. So, there is a correlation to what type of services you provide into your district and how much you're investing in your district and what you're not. The view is that, well, we will allow the cap to be larger so that, until I think it's 2 years, you have to be out of it for 2 years. I can't remember. I'm sure I'm misquoting it exactly, but there is some direct correlation to the performance that you're in district and what is allowed, how they cap what you're able to send out. And if you're underperforming, they do allow you to send more students out.
So do you know if we are technically underperforming, or if there's, to put a more positive spin on it, do you know if there's potential there to actually reduce the cap if we were to, say, improve the performance of the schools?
I can't say with exact certainty. I know a few years ago, at one point, we were at risk for maybe right before COVID, to be honest. There was one year where we were at that, I won't say we got a notice, but however the DESE advises you, that we were at a threshold that was at risk for some increased allowance to a charter school. But I can't remember exactly how it's worded or how they calculated it, but there was some notice that was given to the school. It didn't, Mary, can you speak to that a little bit
Yeah,
better?
I was going to say, if I remember correctly, it doesn't have anything to do with our students or how they're performing. It speaks to the number, the students who, so every student is supposed to take the MCAS. And in some cases, parents, and Colleen, you can correct me if I'm making a mistake here, but in some cases, families just decided that they didn't want their kids to take MCAS. And we've got such a small population that it had a dramatic impact on us. So we were trying really hard to get every student to at least take the MCAS. Regardless of what the results came out at. But like Natasha said, I think it was right before COVID, and then COVID hit. So, and it's the number right now, if I remember correctly, it's 10%. It's
Yeah,
not
it was 10%.
of the population. It's 10% of a number, a budget number.
And I think you had to hit it twice, like in 2 years.
I'm
Yeah.
looking at DESE's site right now. And it says that for the majority of districts, the limit for Commonwealth charter school tuition payment is 9% of the district's NSS, which is the district's net school spending.
Okay.
Charter school law, however, provides for a higher limit in school districts ranked in the lowest 10% of all statewide student performance scores based on the MCAS results from the 2 most recent school years.
Thank you.
So if MCAS scores
Thanks.
decline, which is, yeah, that's the correlation, then it could impact. Charter school.
Natasha, did you have you had your hand up for another comment?
Yes, I just wanted
Okay.
to also, aside from charter school, because there's only so much we can do really about that right now, it is important to always consider Maynard is always going to be a gateway community into the charter school that, you know, we can't move ourselves. That's who we are. It's one of the 4. But beyond that, I know special education is the other area that feeds into that net school spending amount. That's, I think, for the state, Maynard is one of the 10 or 15 highest expensed towns of how much we spend out of our total budget towards special education needs. You know, when we think about the kids that are now coming through at younger grades, more kids are being identified requiring need. What makes better, what helps us move forward is that we have been working to build internal programs, to build inside, you know, increasing the Tiger program, all of those areas, which is internal, to address those and retain the students. Unfortunately, if we're not able to do that for whatever reason, if it's a matter of resources, the only and right now, I think as of a year and a half ago, we were below the state average of in-district programs for, I forget how it's called, but it's basically like a partial inclusion. And that is what the Tiger program was also looking to expand to keep in district. But when we look beyond that, that's when you have the cost of out-of-district transportation that increases then the tuitions for the out-of-district schools. And so that's one of the areas that we can have a direct you know, improvement on. And I would hate to see that our inability to improve programs, especially at the lower level, which will only, you know, help that any children invest as they get older, and also to stay in district as well, because some of those schools they go to are, you know, or sometimes parents choose to leave, even if it's not an out of district placement, they may choose to, you know, pay out of pocket to leave. And then so I just want to make sure we're also remembering that is the other population that is not shrinking by any means, and the costs related to special education are not shrinking. They're at one point, as of last year, I think they were growing almost 1 million annually for a whole host of different reasons. So that is something that's, out of our control as to the fact of the, what transportation costs, but what is within our control is building programs in district, and having resources in our budget allows us to do that.
And
Okay, thank you.
I was
I
gonna
want
say,
to be conscientious of it being 8:10, and we still have two pretty hefty items in our agenda. I know this is not the last conversation we will have about the school budget this year. But if you have any other particular questions about Brian's presentation at this time, I want to let anyone on the FinCom go ahead and raise their hand. Okay.
Um,
Kevin, yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick question, Natasha. Is there any item that currently, like any item in your proposal that's not being funded by the town administrator's proposal that you can point to that would be a program that you just described, like a special education program that you described?
Any program in the district that's not being funded? Is that what you're?
The
I think what he
outstanding
means is if
items.
you, that 400 that you would have to cut is any, do you think, and I think they don't know that yet, Gavin, but would it be one of those like special ed programs, the Tiger programs, things like that you were just talking about?
Well, when it comes to the special education, I mean, there's a compliance piece there that, I don't think anyone is going to say we're cutting something we required to have because we've committed legally to it. But as far as expanding offerings, so I think one of the things we've talked about extensively is increasing tier 2 opportunities for students. And we've talked about, having more coaching, language, math opportunities, just what we talked about, the increased learning time by adding the lunch that allows. And the reason why that allows that is that the teachers, by not covering lunch, they are able to then provide more instruction in the classroom. And that helps, I mean, just very, very concretely, gives the kids more exposure to their academics to support them, and more direct contact with the students on whatever it is, and possibly opportunities to do those tier 2 options wherever they might be needed. So I think if you're looking for a concrete where would the cuts happen, I don't think we're gonna get that right now.
Okay. So Natasha, the next item on our agenda is the Green Meadow Building Committee. Do you want to go ahead and end your school committee meeting now? Or are you guys going to hang on for that discussion? It's up to, I don't know what you were planning, what you think.
Well, I think we kind of weren't sure either. If I mean, we have a quorum here, and I don't know if not everyone has heard all the conversations. I was planning to stick around because I normally do
Sure.
anyway for FinCom, but if I could just maybe check, because I'd rather it stay open, even if we're just kind of listening in case someone
Okay.
does have a question.
Yep, that's fine.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, unless Elizabeth and Mauro, Mary, are you planning on signing off, or do you want to hang around?
staying on.
Yeah, I'd like to stay around if I can.
Okay, well,
Okay.
that's quorum at least. And
Yeah,
Mauro, by the
exactly.
way, I'm so sorry that
Bri-
you had gone to the town hall at the beginning. I don't know why that said hybrid, and I apologize that I hadn't caught it sooner. So
I just
wanted-
wanted to check, Brian, are you, I know you have a lot of meetings this week as well, so do you want to
Yeah.
hang around, or you want to sign off?
I'll listen for the Green Meadow. I don't know what's after that, but I know Justine and I have been at a couple of recent
Okay.
working group meetings. So I
Okay, I just want to make sure, but I didn't want to assume. So, all right.
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Okay, so moving on, our next agenda item is a discussion. And again, this is really just a discussion because we hadn't really had an open one with all of the FinCom regarding the Green Meadow building in a while. So it was asked to be an agenda item. I did ask if Justine could come today, just because I know she's on that committee and she's our liaison, and thought that might be helpful for the discussion. I'm not entirely sure where to start it off. I guess Katie, you are our liaison to that group. I don't know if there's anything that you want to start off with that's been going on lately. That I don't want to put you on the spot either. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't have you prepare anything, so.
No, it's okay. I was at the last meeting, but I had missed a couple prior to that.
Mhm.
I had wrote some notes on some Post-its that I could read that stood
Okay.
out to me at the last meeting. But it sounded like there's a push to a June 21st submission now instead of March. And that was a big change. I think they're that the town showing the town now incentives help. There was electricity increases to keep in mind, and the different what is the word I want to do it, where we're looking at a net zero building and the
Oh, the
different options.
sustainability aspect.
Yeah, and that's been a big discussion. And then the school as a shelter was a conversation. But mostly the net zero, and then there's been concerns about engineering, I feel, and communication. But details into that, I'm sure that the committee can speak more of that. But those were my takeaways the last meeting.
Okay. Peter, did you have anything? Because I know this is something you wanted to discuss for sure.
Yes, I had asked to put this on. At the point I asked, it looked like we were more talking about a very fast-tracked voting on a new school this spring. Since then, it has moved back and is slightly slower.
Yeah.
I think there are still concerns about the overall costs of what's being proposed. And, I don't know that, the longer process is going to do very much to address that. So but it may be we want to wait a little while till we get a clearer picture. But I mean, at this point, I just, I think as a committee, we need to grapple with the idea we're going to have to make a recommendation. And right now it's, a very big ask on taxpayers. And I just don't know how it's ever going to pass is a little bit of my problem. I don't know what the alternatives are. In a brief look at the materials, I mean, I think the obvious one is, the repair option being cheaper than the new school option. And that needs to, even if the school building committee has fully vetted that, they're still all on board for new school versus repair. That's going to be the obvious thing that comes up at town meeting. And, we as a committee need to get a little more familiar with that. So, we can both make a decision on a recommendation, but then, explain it to people too. But overall, it just was, my concern was the very quick process that was going to result in a very large tax bill. That, I'm glad to see has been slowed down a little bit. But I'm not sure it's really going to change the numbers very much, but at least we get a chance to adjust to them maybe. But so I'm feeling a little less urgent to discuss it exactly tonight, but I think it's good that we start talking about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and it sounded like members from other committees were on the same page, that people were not on the same page, and that has come up more recently,
Yeah, I think too, learning a bit about how the reimbursement works, and I think Justine, you might be able to speak to this a little bit more clearly because I didn't certainly understand it entirely. I feel like it was sort of just, you do this with the MSBA and they pay you back 50% basically, or up to, or there was, there's some language around that, but it's actually pretty specific in terms of square footage, how much they'll pay you. And it's it's a much more calculated thing, I think, than I understood at the beginning. And it didn't look exactly like what I thought it was going to add up to. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit. I see your hand up anyway. So go ahead, Justine.
Thank you. Yes, I figured I would jump in real quick if that's okay, because I did want to give some updates. I know that I had brought up some concerns during the select board meeting. And since then, in case members of the FinCom haven't been aware of this, we've had significant progress regarding kind of taking a step and, giving us all a chance to really look at this process in a thoughtful manner, and be confident with the numbers that we're going to move forward, be confident with the process moving forward. I was the one who brought it up, but since then, I feel like there's been a lot of feedback that I think that there are a lot of people who are much more comfortable with the speed that we're going to go with this. I will say some of the complaints or concerns that we've heard is that, the minutes haven't been posted online in a timely manner, things like that. So one of the things they've changed is that we're actually posting our draft minutes now as well. So anyone it is on the Maynard Public Schools page under the Green Meadow School Building Project. You can look at all of our minutes, including the ones that aren't even accepted yet. We are going to start recording the meetings and posting them under the community forum. So that is a change as well. That's a way that people can hear the dialogue that's going on as well of the Green Meadow Building Committee. And as far as that funding goes, Alana, that is correct. So I felt, and I've been involved in this since the beginning, also since 2019 when we got the phone call. And I know that there's items that are not eligible, that will never be eligible, but there's construction costs. And in that, I had always heard, well, the schools will cover, we weren't really sure the full amount, but about 55% of the construction cost, of the eligible construction cost. And then I started hearing that there's a cap to that. There's the $360 cap to that. And what we saw at the last community forum, when we really started seeing when we saw the numbers for the first time, presented in that way, what we actually got a chance to see is that, so the MSBA was, for the longest time, basically their $360 cap is about what they used to think that a school construction cost should cost. So, when we were looking originally, we were looking at, you guys have been talking about inflation tonight. We were looking at projects that had cost about $400-ish a square foot. So the MSBA had said, well, they're only reimbursing $360 a square foot. Well, right now our estimators, they are being conservative, but our estimators are estimating at $700 a square foot. So when you look,
hold on, just to be clear, Justine, their cap per square foot, they reimburse that, or they reimburse their percentage of that?
So that's what I'm getting at. Yes.
Okay, sorry.
So they will. So they thought when it first started, they were reimbursing about the cost, 55% of the school, because the square footage cost was about that same. The problem is that building a school has increased enormously over the past couple of years. The board of directors of the MSBA did agree to increase some of their funding. So their cap now is $393 as opposed to $360. But it's still, the MSBA will be reimbursing a percentage, about 50, 55-ish, 60, hopefully, but who knows? We're hoping, of that $393 per square foot. So when you're looking at the latest figures we saw, very, very preliminary figures we saw was about a $79 million school. I did write this down. The eligible costs they're estimating now is about 38%, because basically, in addition to the $393 per square foot, they also changed the way they determine reimbursement for site costs and for architect and for OPM designs. So we were able to get a little bit more from each of them as well. So right now, what they're looking at, and again, it's extremely preliminary, is the slide that we saw the other day was eligible out of a $79 million school. that is estimated at $700 a square foot is about $30 million would be reimbursed, could be reimbursed, and $48.7 million would be the local share, which I agree is still a lot of money. I will say that I have seen the $48 million number before, which makes me feel better than the $54 million number that we saw a couple weeks ago. But in addition to the meetings that we've been having and the strides we've been making in kind of taking a step back and being more methodical about this, we are starting to have budget meetings as well. That, so the OPM and the designer can really hear the budget concerns, and we can talk about what's being value engineered. We can talk about, one thing that I had brought up was the square footage had gone up about to 2,500 square feet. And one of the things that was pointed out the other day was that, yes, that did go up, but it did not, they don't anticipate that was a big budget driver. So what they're going to do is they're going to come back with that estimated cost of what that actually did cost to go up that, because at that point they're building, partitions, walls, things like that, which doesn't cost as much as utilities, for example. The other thing that's different that has happened because of this slowdown is that, so like Katie said, they're going to be, we're going to be looking at a cost estimate in mid-March. The submission, the approval will be at the June meeting for the MSBA. The submission is for April 27th. One thing that was going on, one thing that happened earlier was that the way that it was working was the building committee was going to vote on whatever that was, the 18th, and then the select board was going to vote to approve it on the 19th. And the select board doesn't vote on anything the next day or the day that they see it. That just doesn't happen for us. And so when I started talking to the OPM about it, we've come up with a solution, which is to give the schematic design will probably be ready about a month ahead of time. And so when it is available to the building committee, it is also going to be made available to the select board. And actually, when Brian was on the meeting the other day, he brought up, and thank you, Brian, for doing that. He brought up to have FinCom and the school committee included in that as well. So basically, these main boards will have access to this a month ahead of time. And then from the schematic design, which is if it is voted on and if it is approved, the other part is that we will still have the option to value engineer after that as well. I think that there was a misunderstanding, and I do admit that part of it was my misunderstanding as far as how much of the schematic design can be changed, how much of the design can be changed after is submitted to the MSBA. And basically what this initial step does is it gives the MSBA, they have a conversation with the OPM and the designer, they figure out what's eligible costs, they figure out what's ineligible costs, and then the MSBA will come up with what they will pay for. To my understanding, this is how this works. Then, we'll come back and we will work on, finalizing or formatting the building from there. If there's tweaks that need to be made, if there are, things we want to value engineer down a little bit more, something like that, we can still make those changes. We just can't change the size of the educational space, and we can't change the overall character of the building, and we have to make sure the site design is maintained. But the OPM seemed fairly confident in the fact that, there are changes, there are tweaks that can be made past this. And I think that what it felt like with this vote is that it was almost the drop dead vote of we're going to put this forward and we have no control over the project after that happens. So we're working hard to reassure people that is not what we're trying to do. And I agree with Peter as far as the fact that a very expensive school is going to be something that is going to be very tough to pass, which is why we have to take these steps to make sure that all our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted, and that we have the information and we're confident in it in order to move it forward.
Thank you, Justine. I really appreciate all of that explanation. And just to be clear, so the new timeline, the MSBA will vote at their June meeting, and then that means that we as a town will be voting via ballot and town meeting for this sometime in the fall.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then construction will begin, excuse me. Like
In
the
20, I think fall of 24. I think they were saying a year
Okay.
from the vote.
Kevin, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. So just one thing I want to point out, I know we've talked about kind of the cost comparisons. But one concern I have is about comparing the base repaired code upgrade scenario to the other scenarios, including the new construction. With that base repair and code upgrade, the lifetime of that is likely to be significantly less than a new building. And one of the things we should be very careful of is to not mislead town meeting voters in that regard, and that like it's not an apples to apples comparison. You really have to factor in like how long that base repair code upgrade is going to last. And really, we actually have field experience of doing the base repair and code upgrade. That is what we've been doing to Green Meadow for over a decade, if not longer now. And I don't think the experience has been very positive for that. So I think we have to, just from a purely financial standpoint, we have to, especially for that base repair, we have to look at and get an estimate for, okay, how long is that going to last us until that fails? And then we put us back into the same scenario. And that could possibly shift the financials. It's probably going to shift the cost up. When you look at that, when you factor in, like if you do like a financial calculation, you say like, okay, what is the apples to apples, when you do the apples to apples comparison, factor in the lifetime of the repair, that is probably going to significantly increase the effective cost of the base repair code upgrade.
Okay, thank you. Ken, I see your hand up. Oh, you're still muted.
So I guess I was wondering, so are there any other options that are even being looked at other than the option that's being presented to MSBA?
No, I believe so Mary, I just want to double check because I know Mary's on the committee with me as well, actually, and Brian. But we have, as a building committee, voted to move forward with this schematic design, this option, as opposed to ad reno or code upgrade. So it is the new school option. The reason I know the reason I voted for this particular option was because it was actually the smallest square footage. So it was the most modest of the school. You know, we had the option of a model school. That was one of them as well, which also can help control costs, but it had a much larger footprint, it had a much larger square footage. So, so that's why I personally voted for the other one.
And Ken, just to follow up, because that question was brought up at, I think, one of the community forums. So I had asked the OPM afterwards, if this one doesn't pass, could we go back to the MSBA with an alternative, one of the other ones that we had discounted? And they said, no, you'd be back in line again and years down the road. And to what Kevin was talking about, the thing that we do have to get out to the public is it's not this or nothing. It is doing serious renovations to the existing school, for which the full cost will be on us. There'll be displacement of the kids as far as, you know, maybe the modular classrooms and things of that nature. So we really need to, they did, one of the options that the OPM did do was exactly that. In fact, there were a couple of them. So we can go back to that. And they did give us a rough dollar amount at that time. So we need to really fine tune that so that we can really speak to that and let people know, you know, what the option is.
Well, and this, of course, was the same argument that we made with the high school, that it wasn't a matter of the new high school or nothing. It was a matter of the new high school or continuing to put money into a rapidly obsoleting building. So obsolescent. Who's going to be making that presentation to town meeting voters? And I assume that's going to happen well before fall town meeting.
As far as the public outreach,
Yeah, I mean, so we go out to town meeting voters and say, to the community and say, look, this is the option. We had other options. We could have certainly done something more expensive. This was the option that we felt, best met our needs at the lowest possible cost. And certainly in the longer term is a better option than continuing to pour money into, to a very old building.
so I think that the plan is, and Mary, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the plan is once the schematic design is submitted, then we'll start with the public outreach, the public forums, the meeting. Mary was involved in it a lot for the high school as well. The individual meetings, the coffees, the things like that to make sure that you get the word out as much as possible.
And so then I guess the last question I'll ask is, have Greg and Lori started to work with whomever to estimate the average cost increase in terms of tax increase per property? Are those numbers widely available at this point?
So one of the things that I brought up a couple of meetings ago was I asked if we were locked into a 20-year bond, and we are not. So one of the numbers that they're going to be looking at is what does it look like for a 25-year bond or a 30-year bond? Because this is like the last building. We won't have to do anything. This is it. This is the last big building that we've got, the last big project.
Oh, that's not true.
No, it is true. Unless the DPW decides that they need a Taj Mahal, I don't know. But,
Can we actually, we did have an estimate and it was emailed back in June. So this may change or have changed. But at that time, the estimate for a $48 million debt exclusion would be $645 increase to the average family tax bill.
with a
And
20-year bond.
I see that Lori came back on, so.
Oh.
Yes,
Wow.
we have been working
That-
with bond counsel and to running some estimates on different scenarios. Greg has those different scenarios, but from what I understand is it keeps changing a little bit. So we don't really want to put anything out there till we know what it's going to be. You don't want to tell the taxpayers one thing and scare them off. Because we have looked into 20-year bonds and 30-year bonds, multiple rates, multiple amounts. So we do have a lot of data on that we have been working on, but we're still waiting for the final numbers. So it looks like now that we're looking, I was told last to look at 48 million and 54 million, I believe it was, or 58 million, one or the other. So we like I said, we do have various debt schedules. We have gone on, there's an actual calculator on the DLS website where you can put in the amount of the debt service payment and calculate what it's going to cost the average taxpayer. So until we have those final numbers, though, to see what we want to show to the public.
Right.
So I'm not
Thank
sure
you,
we
Lori.
said where things are changing with the MSBA. Last I heard, Greg asked me to hold off because I did have we did, like I said, we do have all those numbers, and then Greg said to hold off because the MSBA was recalculating what they would reimburse to the town. So, and it looks like it's going to cost us, quite a few million less.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to point out that we in the Bob McCarthy model, we do see a significant fall off in our capital or in our debt servicing costs. So right, apparently in the model, I see like a 28% drop. I am right now in Excel calculating exactly what that drop is. But we are seeing it's about $1 million.
Yeah, it's a little over $1 million, Kevin, but that was offset by the MSBA reimbursement we were receiving as revenue every year too. So we also lost that funding source. So the true delta is about $100 and something thousand payment that the town was responsible for.
Okay. and that's probably going to be less. So it's
So
like,
it looks better on the spreadsheet than it really is.
okay, so you have to factor in the drop off. So that's 100,000, 20-year, like a 30-year bond. We are looking at, I mean that they'll take off like, at more than 10% off the cost. I know it's not significant, but I just wanted to point out that we are seeing a decrease in capital costs. Do you know if we have additional capital costs rolling off, Lori? Like for the high school?
In future
or-
years, I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me, but I do believe, hold on one second, let me pull it up.
Say the high school is maybe 10 years more.
Yeah.
Laurie, why don't I give you a second to look at that
Okay.
and we'll move on
Yep.
to Natasha and
I
then
had a
we'll get
million
back to-
things open. I
Yeah,
had to close.
that's fine.
I think it's important that, let me just say, I think it's important that when we present the tax impact, that we factor in that capital debt servicing roll off, and we can say like, okay, yeah, there's going to be some pain in the front years, but a lot of debt is rolling off, or I think Fowler's rolling off our books, and then the
Mhm.
high school in 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna,
Right.
there is going to be some pain, but it's not going to be forever.
It
Yeah,
looks
but
like
see,
the,
this is where I think we have to look at the capital planning committee
Yeah.
and their longer term plan,
Mhm.
because, you're saying that it falls off. Well, it doesn't fall off. There's always something more down the road that
Mhm.
comes in. And so I don't want to be sitting here saying to town meeting voters, hey, the pain will, go away over time, when we're not sure that is. And when, in fact, when we know the capital planning committee has a longer term plan that suggests otherwise.
right, it
Absolutely.
appears
Sorry,
the
go ahead, Lori.
library will be falling off in fiscal 26.
Nice.
What do you call it there? The GMSCS, the roof will be
Mhm.
dropping off in 27. The Green Meadow School, the roof, let's see, we have spreadsheet those two. So then it looks like there's a few things for like the Green Meadow system, the playground improvements, those will be dropping off in roughly 28. And there'll be a few more dropping off in 29. So we do, and then another thing we were looking at with the bond, with bond council, was depending on the timing of our bonding, whether the first payment the first year would be what was considered a long coupon versus a regular, which would be a bigger payment the first year, which is a more significant hit in your taxes the first year. So we got to look at the timing of bonding. So that's why we were, Greg was asking about, actually when will shovel hit ground, when we actually need the money,
Right.
the timing of the bonding, that all has to come into play as well as to what the cost will be for, especially for the first year. Because some of the schedules
Okay.
we were receiving from bond council, the first year was what they considered a long coupon due to when we were bonding. And it was significantly higher due to that.
Okay.
Now, one last point is something else that we could possibly factor in is the possible sale of the art space building. I don't know what the timing is or what the plan for that building is, but if the select board intends to sell it, maybe the timing could work out such that we could offset some of the cost of Green Meadow from the sale of that asset.
I'm not sure what the board of selectmen have planned for that building. at this
That's
time.
another committee forming.
Yep.
Yeah,
but-
I'm not sure what their
But
plan is.
yes,
But I mean, hopefully if we could time this right, we could, reduce that headline cost for people and reduce that upfront impact if we time this right.
okay, I'm gonna move on to Natasha.
Yeah, I just wanted to make just 2 points. One, that the school committee had raised at, because I had gone to that last public forum, and there were some really great questions that were raised by some very knowledgeable people. And I know, Brian, and Mary, you correct me wrong, those were being sent over to the OPM to get follow-up, and they'll be posted on the website as well as kind of like a follow-up, because I imagine as those outreach continue, there are going to be some similar themes, questions. It'll be really great to not feel like we're kind of reinventing the wheel with answers, or at some point when they are posted, that we can, highlight that link in, more prominently. Like, here are some questions that have been answered along the way, and so maybe that might bring some reassurances, even Justine, what you're talking about, the timeline and that, I think that's a really great thing to somehow get out into the public at some point soon, before people get more anxious than they are right now about it. If there's an opportunity to do that, to say this is when, our amended, schedule, because I know we talk about it, we're closer to it, but, Joe Q Public is not necessarily, so that they can maybe realize they have some more time to get abreast to the information that's out there before it actually, because I think all information had been leading to a spring vote, right? And now it's going to be in the fall, so that would be good to let people know that that's not happening right around the corner. And I think the other part too, as we're debating about, as all committees, on how the success of this with the town, I think the measure is going to be looking at other needs that are out there currently, not just what we foresee, but what are known. And at the select board meeting, I know the seniors are really in dire need of some attention, and my one person speaking, but just know that there's a very deep advocacy and draw to that. So I think that if there's some way between now and the spring to come up with some, because we have so many priorities in our town, right? We have the water, the infrastructure, the school. We really can't work in these silos. Everything has to have some momentum, moving forward. I think it would be more promising, considering that is a large voting demographic, that they had some pleasantries on their horizon to look forward to before the fall.
I will say, Natasha, that the OPM, the designer, are working at answering those FAQs, basically, along with other ones, and those are going to be posted. They are very interested in making sure that all the information is out there and available. I think the biggest concern at this point and moving forward is misinformation, or people feeling unsure, because that's something that can be a problem. So they are working really hard at making sure that it doesn't happen.
Is there any the Green Meadow Building Committee, maybe even if they can put out like a notice themselves, like hey, just a beginning of the year, kind of very general, this is what we're looking forward to, these are the things we're working on, these are some bullet points of truths, that we've discussed as a committee. I don't know, just to kind of get more factual information in people's mind, as a seed coming directly from the building committee, who is really very intimately involved in this process, versus just hearing what you hear from your neighbor. I think that might be, and also to publicize if you have any questions. I know there's an email address that, get that out there now for people to respond and send feedback, so that the OPM can, continue to answer those questions. But it'd be great if there's some type of announcement or something can be more visible, even if there's not action happening right now, but just to plant a good foundation.
Yeah, I'll double check. I'm not sure what the current page of the MSBA or the Green Meadow Building Committee Facebook page looks like, but I can reach out and find out.
Thanks.
Bob, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I can lower my hand. I didn't do it last time. I definitely get the concerns that people have about not publicizing too much of this before we have a better understanding of square footage and cost per square foot and everything else. But I guess relative to the stakeholders, heading into, say, the budget meeting in February, I'm just wondering if it's possible to have some idea of the timeline. If we're talking about, like Kevin was talking about, when are things rolling off, the debt schedule. Is it possible to pick 1 or 2 years we think the first bonding will happen, even though we can't say, how much it will be and what will the first tax bill be? when will it likely hit, to the point where we're going to be paying some higher tax bills? We know even between 1 or 2 fiscal years, so that we can do some planning around all those other priorities that the capital planning committee is, I'm sure, struggling with and trying to figure out when will this impact us, so that we can stage things.
Yeah, I think we definitely will have a better idea of when, in what fiscal year for sure, that we're going to have to start.
But not
working
in
on
the
paying.
fall. I'm talking about as we look at our future possibilities, making choices about capital and that kind of thing leading up to our May town meeting. So could we be discussing that timing in February, at that February meeting?
So I can bring that up with Greg and see if that's something that's an option also. I mean, I would assume, and again, I realize that this is recorded and that I'm speaking out of turn, but I would assume that if construction is anticipated to begin in the fall of 2024, then that's when, we'll have to start paying bills to this would probably be the end of FY24, beginning of FY25.
Right, if we need to start getting them, if we need to have the money in 24 and 25 to start paying the bills, we wouldn't start until FY25, correct? The construction?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right, yeah, so FY25, because it'd be like fall of 24, so that's FY25, right?
Right, depending on when we have to borrow, our first payment wouldn't be due till the following year, so that's when it would actually hit the tax rolls.
And you're thinking that's FY25, right, Lori?
At least 25, because even with the former time frame was, even if everything passed a town meeting and then we went to a special election, the estimate was shovel hits ground July of the following year. That's when we need to bond right around then. So the bill would, the first bill wouldn't be due until FY25.
Yeah.
With that time frame. Now it looks like we're kicking it out a little further. So I said that all comes into play with first year's payment when we actually have to go out to bond for it, how quickly we need money, how much we need.
Yeah.
to
I
tell
realize
us it's gonna be
at least we
25
have
or
a fairly
26.
recent example in the high school, or yes, fire station even closer, how it kind of laid out. But it does mean it's in the next 3-year planning horizon that it will be our tax bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Kevin, I will get to you just one second. I do want to just be a little conscientious again of time, that it's almost 9 o'clock. And we still have another agenda item or a couple to discuss. I did have one quick question for the building committee. And then Kevin will get to your question. The general design at the moment is somewhere around a little under 90,000 square feet. Is that correct?
Little over
And
90,300.
okay. And the current Green Meadow is about 75,000 square feet, I believe.
Yeah, I think 76. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you just briefly talk about what the additional square footage, that almost, 20,000 square foot difference, what that is going to entail, what's needed there?
So Brian, would you like to take this? Because I know that you had the conversations with the designer, and would that be okay? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the changes are just regulation and code. So specific classrooms are a certain number of square feet, whereas the older buildings, that wasn't the case. They've increased, and specifically so for an elementary school, the rooms are actually bigger, like at kindergarten, first grade, those rooms, right, kindergarten in particular, are larger than, say, high school rooms. And so we have those, and we have a lot of them. We have guidance spaces. We have rooms. So we have a cafeteria and a gym, and we want it set up sort of the new way so that they're combined, so you can open them up and use them. So a lot of the additional space is really connected to MSBA code and how large classrooms should be, libraries, individual office space. And they've done, and I would say our OPMs and designers have done a really good job of making space as reimbursable as possible. So what you call space becomes really important. And so how it's titled then relates to whether or not it's reimbursable. They've really maximized our space in that way.
Thank you, that's helpful. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so responding to Natasha's comment regarding the concerns of seniors, I certainly respect those concerns, especially those that don't have children in the schools. I think the first point is that financially, my intuition at this point says that either renovation or new school is probably going to be in the long term. The long-term financials is going to be superior to the just bringing it up to code. The second point, and this is kind of a question as well, is it possible that in terms of the legislation we bring to town meeting voters, that there could be a infrastructure package that includes the schools, but also includes, say, something for the seniors?
That's interesting. I think we have to be careful with doing anything that is not specifically how the MSBA makes you present things and vote on. That's my intuition on that, but I'm not 100% sure. Justine, do you have any?
Well, I know that, so I know one of the conversations we had back in 2019 was, it was actually prior to the fire station passing. You know, and actually it was a concern that, you know, knowing that we needed a fire station and a school, how that was going to work. And basically our goal at that point was to pass the fire station so we could be that much further along in our debt schedule when the debt started for the school. I don't know, because I know that I believe there was talk back in the high school days of, you know, doing alumni field and combining that with the high school. And then ultimately that wasn't chosen because of the cost to the taxpayers, from what I remember. So that would be my concern, is if we have something, if you already have something that's this large, that if you bundle that, even if you don't bundle it in the same article, if you bundle it as on your tax bill, that would be might be a tough sell.
I mean, the thing I want, you know, a proposition that may get more support would be a bill that offers something for everyone, not just for people that have children in the schools, but also for people that don't. And I would take a wild guess, but I would say most seniors don't have children in the schools or have children that are about to graduate. And so if we were to bundle, say, something for them into a article that included the schools, that may be a way of garnering more support for this project.
Yeah, I have an issue with that, though. I mean, we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility to provide education to the students, the same responsibilities that, you know, seniors that funded our education went through. And that's the case that I think we need to make. We don't sit there and say, well, we're going to give you something. You know, we all got an education. Okay. And there's a responsibility. We have a responsibility as a town, make sure that the kids that are going through the schools right now get the kind of education they deserve, just like, you know, people of our parents' generation did.
And honestly, I would just have to add, sorry if I jumped in here, but you know, when the capital planning committee comes up with their recommendations based on all kinds of criteria, safety, all kinds of things, that may just mean that, you know, you can't just give people what they want in order to garner support for one other project. We're just not that big that we can do it that way, I would argue, from at least my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we stick to a positive message on what the, you know, the benefits of the new school and how we've come together to the design that we've come to and why it's this one, you know. I would even argue to be wary of saying, or the other option would be, if we don't get this, we can repair. Because to me, that's not, you know, the message is this is the option. This is what we've, the people that have worked long and hard have figured out to be the best option. Let's vote on this option and
No,
garner
but we
support
do
for it.
need, we do need to talk about the repair option. Okay, we do need to make a point, that, like Mary was saying a little while ago, this is not, this is not the choice between an expensive school and doing nothing or having an inexpensive repair. Reality is, if you pour money into an old building, it's going to be lost money, and eventually, and not too far down the line, we're going to be right back where we are right now.
No, that absolutely, that is absolutely true. I just don't think that should be like the leading, I feel like I think we have a better case than we feel like we do. I mean, I think there is a positive, really, really well done case for this. And if we market it, as such, that I think we do have a very strong case with what it is.
I'm fairly confident, Ken, that if once we factor in what you said, throwing money into an old building, when you factor in that lifetime, that short lifetime for that bare bones option that's only going to last like maybe 5 years at most, when you factor that into your cost estimate, that is going to come out to be way more expensive than the other two options.
Right. All right, Natasha, I'll let you go too. And then I think we'll try to wrap this up for time's sake.
Sorry. Yeah, I think just human nature and just understanding where we are as a society in our financial landscape, it's kind of hard to, or I think it's just natural for people to be like the impact to your individual, your household. So I think the goodwill or understanding, believe me, I'm on the school committee of what I think should happen, and in investing in our education and I think absolutely rings true. But I also know that people directly will want to weigh that against, how does this mean for me and my household, right? That's just natural. And it's not wrong that anyone, would do that. It's just, that's what it comes down to, of how they're able to, support the town. I wonder if part of the conversation is that there are so many needs, like the capital planning committee has tons of things on there that may never feel like they're ever going to get done. We hear about the roads and all these other areas that talking about an override for maybe those non-school related projects might also be a separate conversation to have, because then there is impact beyond just the school and the fire department. But there needs to be an emphasis on all the needs of what the residents are requiring. And I don't think simultaneously may be happening, but putting some really good thought into, if we were to have an override in a few, a year or two, for whatever reason, is there a plan of what that would entail? What are the things that we would want to bundle into that to maybe do for, to get some momentum into the capital planning projects that maybe feel like they never come to fruition. So I don't like the idea of necessarily tying them together, but I think that certainly needing to look at those other areas that feel like they always fall to the bottom of the priority list should be part of the conversation.
Okay. So it is a little after 9 now. FinCom still needs to discuss some budget work for the February meeting. So unless there's anything else pressing having to do with this particular topic, and again, this will not be the only discussion we will have about this for sure. I think I will go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. And if Natasha, if your committee wants to close, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. So I will make a motion that we adjourn the school committee meeting at 9:05 p.m.
I'll second.
Okay, Mary Branley,
Yes.
Maura Hogan. Oh, you're muted. I'll come back. Oh, there you
Yes.
go. Okay. Elizabeth Albota,
Yes.
Natasha Rivera. Yes. Okay. School committee meeting adjourned.
Thank you very
Brian.
much.
Thanks for joining us.
All right,
Thank you. I'm
Thank
gonna
you,
hang
everyone.
out.
Thank you.
but
Yep, sure. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is our continuing preparation for the February budget meeting. I sent today some work that Bob has done for us on the model that we are going with. Thank you so much, Bob, for sending that around. We really appreciate it.
I wouldn't have been able to do what I did without Lori's hard work in the last week, getting the model back up to updated for the years up through 24.
Yes, thank you, Lori, for that update to get us going as well.
You're
We appreciate
welcome.
it.
I did want to mention one thing that I didn't mention in my email to you. When I put in the preliminary for FY24, if you notice, there's a huge delta between general government and benefits and employee benefits. And that is the way, because of the way ClearGov categorizes liability insurance. I guess in a lot of other towns, liability insurance falls under employee benefits, with Medicare and all those things. We categorize that under general government. So in the prior years, it's under general government. This year in the preliminary budget, I went by the way ClearGov had it sectioned off in the functional segments. I can change that and fix it so it doesn't look so drastic. I honestly didn't realize it. Greg and I talked about it, but didn't even think about it when I sent it to you guys. So I can fix that and send it back to you tomorrow. This
Sure.
way you can really compare year over year versus.
Well, we could talk about that a little bit. I think if you think the right way to do it is portioning it another way, all we have to do is put a comment in there and say, this is a one-time change. We've done it before. We've moved stuff from DPW to general government back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. In fact, Greg had me for the sub-budget committee tomorrow night. He had me put it back to the way we normally show it. I think I think what it'll be is next year when we're doing ClearGov, there's a few things that we're noticing that we want to tweak next year. And that would just be one of the things that we need to tweak. Honestly, didn't really think about it too much. And then later I noticed, I was like, oh yeah, there's a huge swing there. And so for trying to analyze data year over year, I think it might make it a little bit more difficult. And it's not
So
right
as
or
long
wrong
as
either
it's,
way.
I want the audience for this, again, is the stakeholders here and anybody who will be attending the February meeting. But, for the general public, they're not going to be diving into this spreadsheet. So how we basically explain this, I think, is a discussion to have at some point, probably after the February meeting, but not long after, so that it can be prepared in such a way that it's easy for, typical voters to understand. So at least that's the way I view it. So I don't think we should get too wrapped around it. We're really looking for context that gives us some idea of what the big budget drivers are. How do we, like we've had this discussion here, what can we do to, affect the ones that are biggest? How do we look 3 years ahead and at least begin to think about the impact of decisions we make in this fiscal year on those future years as well? I think it's always going to be close, perfect is the enemy of good enough in this particular case. We're looking at general trends.
Well, then I guess it's just up to you guys how you want to see it, because I know Greg did for sub-budget committee meeting, and it's probably the way we're going to present it at a town meeting, is the way we always have in the past. So as not to confuse taxpayers either and alarm them, or, misconceptions, I guess. So
I got to wander down to get my charging cord, so I'll keep moving.
I just wanted to bring that. I just wanted to for you guys to know that's why that delta is there, and see how you want to present it.
I probably, if he's going to change it for budget subcommittee and he's going to change, and it's going to be that way this year presenting, then I would probably change this one to match. And then if things change moving forward, as we switch to ClearGov potentially, and we start presenting it in a different way, then we'll understand that at that point and go for it. So that would be my inclination. Thank you.
I said, there's all these different little tweaks that we're learning.
Sure. Kevin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
So first, let me, Bob and Lori, thank you so much for this tool. It's immensely helpful. And as you could probably see during this meeting, I've made extensive use of it. So, it's immensely useful. One suggestion, and this is my kind of statistical nitpick. instead of averaging the adjusted percentage rate over 4 years, do you think you could replace that with the compound average growth rate? I bring this up because usually like the finances, if you look at like allowed revenue, it grows exponentially at like 2.5%. So when you take like the average, you're kind of biasing the measure towards later years. There's an implicit statistical bias towards those later years, but that gets ameliorated if instead of using that average rate across years, you use what's called like the compound annual growth rate. And I can send you the Excel formula if you want it. I have it. I copied your spreadsheet and I put it in myself.
Well, one of the things I said to Alana when I first started doing this is that there's a model that I wanted to make sure that we were utilizing. I wanted to make sure that we had the discussion and jump started it, but I don't want to own it. I'm not on the FinCom anymore. And I think somewhere between FinCom and the finance department, there should be ownership. So I don't know how you want to handle that. We talked about it a little bit, but I thought Danielle was going to be doing it more and then she left. So we can have a discussion any way you want. I'm still willing to work on it and help, but if you want to edit it in a way that makes sense, because we still, none of this has any, pivot tables or macros to be able to create graphs or anything else. So that there's still work to do. But I want to just make sure that we're looking at the data in a way that before we get too perfect about it again, that it helps drive a discussion, a data-driven discussion for February. That's the goal. So any feedback is welcome, is the bottom line there. Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll put like the definition in the chat window in case people are curious what it is.
I'm not a guru for Excel.
We don't do chat on Zoom. It has to do with you then have to put that specifically into the minutes of the meeting. It's a whole legal thing. So I don't think we have chat enabled.
Okay.
But you could email or whatever makes
whatever
makes
sense. With the definition. It's a little statistical hang up. It's just that the fact that things exponentially grow. So if you take like the average rate, if you just take the average, if you do what Bob's doing, there's like a implicit bias towards the later years.
It's kind of why I said I don't know if you got the email that I sent along to Alana and Lori, but it said, sometimes it's trending you're looking at, sometimes it's average when it's very close and doesn't change much. So I agree that there's bias in it. So I took the path of least resistance to try to make it
understandable
to get a good idea for a trend.
I mean, this is just a statistical. You did a fantastic job. This is just the data. This is the statistician nitpick here.
Yeah. I wouldn't start to do that with everything only because there's only a few lines here that truly matter. Right. And even one of the questions that Alana put to me early on, and you guys have talked about it in one of your meetings, was why aren't the projections that we did before, bearing out? Well, why we were able to, balance budgets. Sorry, do you want me to go back up? Yeah, I had to come down and do the charging thing. Sorry, I got being too loud here. So what I ended up doing, let's see, I lost my train of thought there. So that what I wanted to make sure was that we had a way to look at this for a few years ahead. I didn't want to, spend all the time on every single detail. When you look at the few years ahead and you look at just this one model that we did, 5A was one of, I think it was A to E scenarios that we looked at. It had a 6% increase year on year for education, right? Well, it doesn't take very long to look at 6% versus what we did do in those 4 years and see that the $3 million we thought we would need an override in 2022 for didn't occur because we didn't give that money to the schools. And a lot of other things too, but that was the big nut. So, I listened very carefully to the descriptions earlier on today. And if we want to do the Green Meadow School and we want to do, 6%, say 5.5% in order to be able to meet their needs for level service, guess what? We don't have that revenue and we don't have a projection to have that revenue from Maynard Crossing or marijuana or anything else. Marijuana sales or anything else. So what do we do with that? Are we prepared to start talking about if we need an override in the next 2 years, right? So we said that before, and I'm sure people said, well, we didn't end up having it. So was the model even worthwhile? Well, just look at the 2.5% and 3% we're talking about for schools versus 6%. And given the base of, $20 million, that's where it goes. So I think a couple of those things need to be grappled with in February. That's a starting point. And I think I wouldn't get too carried away with updates to the model other than, do we believe the percentages for this very finite number of line items make any sense for FY24? And if they do, are they going to make sense for the next just 3 years? I started with 5 and I said, too much, too many unknowns. Let's start with 3. So I wanted to see if you guys thought that made sense.
I'm going to let Ken go ahead because he's had his hand up.
No problem.
Yeah, so now everybody knows why I miss having Bob McCarthy on the FinCom. Because that's exactly the issue here. I don't want to present the spreadsheet, and I'm not suggesting anybody's saying that, but I don't want to present the spreadsheet. I want to have the spreadsheet identify those top 3, 5, 7, whatever issues that we need to put on the board. And I think Bob crystallized one of the things here that I'm really concerned about is that we had projected that our revenues would not be able to keep up with operating expenses and some of the capital projects that we were looking for. And there are some assumptions that we put in there about, as Bob said, about school budget growth and stuff like that the town ended up not funding. And it would be all too easy to sit there and say, okay, so see, we didn't have this problem. Again, exactly what Bob is saying. And I think, I would like us to sit there and start to raise the issue again that, revenue growth is not going to, in the long term, keep up with what we need in order to fund our operations as a town. We're a small micro-urban community, which means that our opportunities for revenue growth are very limited. And yet, because of our infrastructure, operating expenses over the time are gonna continue to grow. I think that's the message that we need to continue to say at the joint budget review. Now, obviously, the joint budget review is about FY24. I get that. But in talking about FY24 and what we're doing there, I think we need to sit there and say, look, there's, you have to look at FY24 in the context of this larger discussion. If we're not doing that, I just don't feel as though we're carrying out our responsibilities to town meeting voters.
I mean, a great example, if I could jump on that for just a second, is this whole discussion about what we're going to have to do in Maytown meeting and then again in the fall about Green Meadow School. People said it in very articulate ways, one way or another. It's people are not going to go through that discussion and say, I'm going to approve this project without having an idea, like Natasha said, of what it means to my household budget. And it doesn't matter whether you're a senior, it doesn't matter whether you're brand new to the town, everybody is going to be impacted by that. And more, even people who said, who believe that government is to do these major projects that we have to pool our resources to do. Even people that are totally interested in that and can follow the logic about a new building versus an old building still will end up saying, I can't afford that. So what do we do about it? Many things. The answer isn't simple, right? The answer isn't one thing. It's proselytize about how great the schools are, and they are, right? Whether you're, everybody needs to hear that, especially the parents of the kids that are in 7th and 8th grade deciding whether to go to another high school for AMSA or wherever it may be. And also have to be honest about what is our limit in terms of tax bill affordability based on other towns. I mean, we could even take this and say, what does it look like in Sudbury right now, in Acton and other places, and say, are we going to be competitive or not? But first, we have to just grapple with our own home garden here in the February meeting. My opinion.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
to build off Ken's point, we've seen, we've seen consumer prices, the average household costs go up 8-10%. Our benefits costs, those are pretty much health insurance companies. And that 8% increase, I have a very strong inclination that 8% increase is reflective of those household costs, the costs being posed on their employees and the salary increases they needed to do. So that 8% increase we're seeing in employee benefits, that is a leading indicator that cost increases are coming. As been pointed out, we have a union negotiation upcoming, and 1.7% isn't going to fly. People are not going to be able to afford to live at a 1.7% increase, given how much costs have grown. So we are looking at costs that are a cost increase for our town that are well above the Proposition 2.5 threshold, I think. And I think we need to have the discussion Ken wants to have about operating overrides. I think we need to have it because DPW can't hire an engineer. I think it's an engineer they have an open rec for. They can't hire right now. We have a teacher negotiation. Costs have increased more than 2.5%. And eventually our town's costs are going to reflect that, or we're going to have to be looking at significant service cuts across.
So let
the
me
board.
just pose this question to you, Kevin, or any of you.
Yep.
If the Prop 2.5 cap came into place, with a lot of people in whatever it was, 1980, deciding this is just too much, can't grow at this rate, it's unsustainable, then what would be the amount that is sustainable for a town of, an average of $100,000, household income, that kind of thing? What proportion of that is acceptable to pay in fees for water and sewer and taxes? And how do we arrive at it? Because to the micro-urban, kind of community and all the conversations before, it's easy to, I agree, there's two sides to the coin. You just described only one of them.
Yeah.
The other is, how do you calculate what's really affordable? And do we have a plan? Do we have a target for that? And, utilizing a tool like this might help us do that.
I think that's an
I would
important.
say that we need to pay far more attention to the revenue side in the longer term. As we've had discussion many times before, the only revenue tool we have in the short term is operational overrides. But that's not obviously the long-term solution. It's got to be, we've got to take a look at revenue growth opportunities that we have and in whatever way. I would also point out that Prop 2.5, when it was originally put in place, did not suggest that taxes should only go up 2.5%. What it suggested is that if it's going to go above 2.5%, there needed to be a more general discussion among government leaders and taxpayers about that. And that tool for having that discussion is the operational override. And as I've said many times, the risk of repeating myself, an operational override and the discussions that go along with that are a good tool to have, or, in terms of understanding town's finances, even if the override is not successful. Having the discussion about priorities and realities is a very important part of this. It's like having a household budget. Even if you don't increase it, you have to have discussions about the fact that your rent is going up and gasoline prices are going up and utilities are going up. You have to have those discussions, and that's a discussion we continue to, I think, as a community, to ignore. And so I'm not looking to have tax revenues increase through continuous operating overrides, although there are some communities that do it that way. What I'm looking for is far more attention on the revenue side and growing revenues, and that would then allow us to carry out our responsibilities on the expense side.
Now, in regards to affordability in Bob's question, I mean, people's salaries have increased. Social Security is increasing their payout in proportion to that CPI. So Social Security payments are going up, I think, 8 or 10% this year.
So is
Um,
Medicare.
So does Medicare. So a lot of those adjustments, I recognize that seniors can't live on Social Security alone. But there are adjustments that are being placed. People who are on salaries have seen salary increases. We are seeing tax rebates from the states. So people should generally see, I'm speaking general here. The people of this town should be having, on average, higher incomes than they were just a year ago or 2 years ago. It's why, but on a purchasing power, when you adjust for the cost of things, when you adjust for based on like a CPI adjustment, which is like what the Federal Reserve does for everything, on a purchasing power basis, in other words, like what our town budget would equivalently buy in like physical goods and services. On a purchasing power basis, over the course of the last year, our town budget has actually shrunk because of inflation.
Yep, and I think to go back to Bob's the flip side of the coin a little bit more too, though, is yeah, how much can we expect? Because inflation is hitting everybody. I know you're saying yes, some salaries have gone up. Yes, Social Security has gone up and things like that. But everybody is dealing with what we are dealing with as a town too. They're all dealing with inflation in their own personal lives. And I think, we are about to, we're already on a schedule of increasing water rates, which we're lacking for a long time. We're basically playing catch up with our water and sewer rates. We are now looking to add a new building shortly after having just added the new fire station. And so for me, also adding an operational override, I really would need to see the real what we would lose if we don't do it to make that case, because I think just saying like, budget numbers and we're not giving this percentage or that percentage when they've asked for this percentage or that percentage. I mean, that's not quite a good enough sell at this point for me with all the other things that we're already asking of our taxpayers. And I think we do have to be very conscientious of those asks. And they'll certainly tell us, like, we will see how this vote goes for the school. We'll see how close it is. That may be very telling in terms of what our town meeting citizens are, want to tell us about the affordability. And it is very hard. And we hear, most of the things that I've heard is how our taxes are so high and the services aren't quite at the level that people want. And that's very hard to balance the level of service and how much we can afford for that service. So it's a tricky, it's a tricky
Alana,
spot.
My number one goal in sitting on this committee is to definitely look to see how we can improve that ratio between services delivered and per taxpayer cost. Like, I'm certainly all about the efficiency of services. What I do know is that we have like two choices, essentially. To boil it down, we have two choices. We either have to figure out some way of increasing revenue, either through an override, or we're looking at what's known as austerity. And austerity has some very bad knock-on effects. I mentioned the death spiral before. That death spiral with the charter schools is just one thing. When you start instituting austerity, it leads to very bad, when towns start instituting austerity, it leads to some very, let me put it this way, it leads to less tax mitigation than is expected, because there are numerous negative feedback loops. When you start doing austerity, you start cutting services, you impact housing values go down, leads to less tax revenue leads to more austerity.
Yeah.
There are numerous negative feedback loops that result in the gains from austerity being less than their apparent face value.
Well, there's also the other, and as Ken has mentioned, though it is a longer term solution, there are other revenue avenues that we have to continually make sure we are going after, for sure, because we can't, because it is so hard to sustain our micro-urban environment and all the services we provide on what we currently have.
So,
Two
so
points
you
on
brought
that,
up
if I
the-
may.
You brought up this issue,
Hold on, Bob.
Alana, you know, of what were, you know, that you wanted to talk about the February 12th meeting.
Mhm.
And so, February 11th meeting. So I guess what I'm just saying is what is it that we collectively as a team, you know, want to put forward as a set of issues? Because we have, you know, this meeting, you know, we have this meeting today, and then, you know, another meeting. What we have one more meeting coming up. I guess
Yeah, I
two
think
more
we have
meetings,
two. We have two more. Yep.
meetings.
So we gotta
And
finalize
we've
our
you know,
message.
so we've got to coalesce. Sorry, Bob, for interrupting.
No problem.
Go ahead, Bob, and then
Well, do you want to have,
yeah,
do you want to try to come up with that? You know, what there's a plan for that? Because I have a couple points I want to make, but I think you probably really want to be prepared for your February 11th meeting. So if you want to follow up on that, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I guess I'm still digesting some of this data.
Well, did Bob, when you were looking at this, or Lori, when you were looking at this, are there particular trends that, you know, that we should be exploring a little bit more to try to line up? I guess that would be one place to start.
Well, let me just throw this out, because the biggest budget line in the entire budget is schools, for obvious reasons. And if we, you know, what is plugged in there now is a plug for the TA recommended budget is 3%. The ask is to go up more, and I don't know exactly what that percentage is. Just take the 3 years we have there, and instead of plugging in, I think I left 3 or 3.5% in there, plug in 5, plug in 6, and all 3 years, you know, for a 25, 6, and 6, and see what it does in terms of the deficit. Just don't change anything else. You're just changing one parameter to see what's the impact. If we believe that's what we should be doing for all the reasons stated earlier, to improve services, keep level, stay competitive, keep the drain going, you know, out to charter schools to a minimum. And you'll see that you have to have an override or a lot more revenue. And if you look at nothing else, that's the trend I want people to see, is that if we don't talk about that at the February 11th meeting, that we only talk about FY24, we'll talk about 3% versus 4.2%. And there'll be no recognition that, you know, austerity takes many faces. It's either I have to, you know, tighten my belt so I can pay a tax bill, or, you know, the town has to tighten its belt, and, you know, we might have, you know, worse outcomes. All that's true. But there has to be, you know, if I'm going to vote for that school, me personally, I want to know what impact it has and what that means for all the other things that are waiting in the wings that aren't being done in town either, that we know are just as important to people as kids getting a good education. Even though you could argue that's a bad priority, it's clear that roads being paved and, you know, a senior center and a whole host of other things have a very big impact on certain people in town. Okay? So I think we owe it to the voting populace to give the context to that. And I think it has to start with looking beyond just FY24 on February 11th and say, what are the things we have control over this year? And then let's start to pull some subcommittees together for 2, 3, 7 years out to do things that a few of us are doing as, you know, ad hoc task forces to do something that, say, town hall employees don't have time to do, which is literally look at what Hudson did and go out and recruit businesses to come here, right? Nobody has that task. And for good reason, they have many other tasks. So let's get some volunteers to start doing those things. But let's look at it year by year by year. If we don't look ahead 3 years, nobody's going to see that it's urgent to go out and do specific things to bring new businesses to town. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox. You're laughing, Laurie. You think it's possible?
Well, just doing an FY24, going through the budget with Greg and all the asks, I mean, the huge drivers are the contractual increases we're seeing from utilities, gas prices. I mean, just our own town council drive, our IT services, the increases we're seeing from them, health insurance, liability insurance, all of those things are much larger than our 2.5% increase. Unfortunately, and I don't, and looking at the revenues, I sent a revenue spreadsheet earlier where we're comparing last year to this year and looking at what we budgeted compared to what we brought in. And, there's two revenues that are a little concerning to me. One is I spoke with Justin earlier today about trash sticker revenue.
Going down still?
Down a lot.
Yeah.
Well, compared to last year at this time, we brought in about 295,000. This year we brought in 221. Same time. Same time frame. So I was asking, Justin, his opinion, what he's seeing out there. And part of it is, we're no longer going to be taking the bulky materials. That's part of it. And he says he did notice, like he doesn't know if people have started to go to other contractors or not. He said he did notice this month tonnage is down, but our recycling costs are up. So just because one cost is down, the other cost is up. So our cost is still there, but our revenue source is going down.
Well, I understand people are also not putting stickers on their trash.
That could be too.
Oh, it is. I mean, I've heard that anecdotally from a number of sources.
Well, anecdotally, I forgot to put it on and they didn't take my trash. So sometimes they pay attention to that. So we'll see.
Anecdotally,
Only once.
Did you put a bag out or did you put a barrel?
I put a barrel out and didn't remember to put the stickers on the top bag.
Okay.
Anecdotally, I think 3 people on my street have now switched over to Monroe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are seeing switch over, but I'm getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
I don't.
Let's not
So
get
to me-
into a trash.
I will reserve my comments regarding the trash for tomorrow's
Yes.
meeting, which Alana, I'll take it on,
Sure.
but yeah, I'll reserve my
So-
Yeah,
comments.
that's for, we still have a couple
So this
more
is the finance
things to talk
committee, right?
Yep.
Looking at the whole
Yep.
town. And there needs to be, budget subcommittees to look at service efficiencies. But I think the charter for this group should be, what are the biggest 5, budget busters? And what are we doing about them? Have we done everything possible either to lower expenses or increase revenue? Everything possible. And if that means working with a consultant or working with a volunteer group outside of FinCom, great, but you want to be an advocate. I believe the best position in town to be an advocate for making changes that affect those big budgets.
Well, I would
So that
say,
if you could put that together for February, which is different than what Greg would put together slightly, I think that would be incredibly valuable.
I would say that 3 of those have got to be the fact that our opportunities for growing revenue are limited, and we need to seriously take a look at those, those kinds of opportunities. And that requires us looking at, commercial projects, in our town, a number of things, but we have got to increase revenue. That'd be number 1. Number 2, we need to address school costs. And, I think we're continuing to underfund the schools. And I think, there are long-term detriments to that. And I think number 3 is that we have to take a look at capital projects and how we fund those And are we setting aside money each year in order to do that? In order to do some of these projects, at least so that we're not having to take out bonds every time we do a project, or that we time these things in a way that it evens it out. So those would be, I guess, three things that I would suggest need to be on the list. But
So the last one, I would highly recommend that you try to get 5 minutes for John Larkin to speak about capital and what is working and what is not working at all, because he's argued since 2006 that we needed a line item in the budget set aside for capital, and it still is not there, as you well know. And that means it's catch as catch can in terms of funding for capital, period.
yeah, we did have discussion with Capcom on was it early December, I guess it was?
I know he's got a lot of work done
Great.
on it. He didn't say it was ready to present, but maybe he could do, and it just 5 minutes worth of overview and what his biggest three wishes would be to change things for the coming fiscal year.
Okay.
Anybody else think that there's any,
That's some-
but those three, are those the top three major things that FinCom should address?
I think you're muted again, Kevin, although it doesn't show muted.
Yep, because I have,
Okay.
I have it
Okay,
here, so I
separate
have
mute.
it handy. I thought it would be faster if I just had it right here on my headset. So I think what would be helpful for me, at least, I don't know, I imagine it might be helpful for this committee in general, but to have like a list of items, like items that are on the bubble or items that are unfunded, and have this committee try to look at what the knock-on effects of either funding the items or not funding the items. Like, for example, not funding, I guess sewer is not part of the water discussion. Like, waters has its own fund, but like, for example, not funding the schools. Not funding the schools, like service cuts to the schools are going to result in increased charter school assessment costs. And maybe that should be a higher priority than something that does not have that same negative knock-on effect. I don't know if there's anything out there that has no knock-on effect, but I think we should be on the lookout for budget items that could possibly be cut and not have such a severe knock-on effect to our revenue or costs.
You're gonna have to have courage to follow through on that, because it'll always be somebody who's gonna stand up and say, you didn't talk about this or that, but not necessarily at the February meeting. It's a chance there with a relatively friendly audience who, could say, this is an interesting discussion. I just think we never take quite the advantage we should take of that February discussion.
I mean, I would love to imitate the capital planning committee where they have that process where they rank all the expenditure items. I would love to copy that process for our operating budget. Like that may be a little bit.
You'd have to modify it, but I agree with you. What gets addressed and why, and are we definitely following any kind of discipline? I think it could be done. It's not quite their process, because they start with avoidance of costs. Maybe there is some of that in operating budget. I'm sure there is, but safety
there is,
and all
Bob.
that sort of stuff. Sure, there is, but
as
safety and all
yeah.
that. So it needs help. It needs work.
I may be too ambitious for this year, but I would love to work to that point where we have that same disciplined process. Of top priority for me is like, I think my biggest concern with this budget process is that we tend to take budget items at their face value and not look at their net effect value.
Yeah, sure.
Like with the schools, for example, we look at the face value of the schools, we look at the face value cost of the schools, but we don't look at the net effect of reducing school services.
So I'm not part of FinCom, so I get to say something like, from a citizen's point of view, people are interested in doing that for their own special interest. Schools may be it, or the new school, whatever. Just be aware that you have to do it with an overall town view, or people will just vilify, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? It's a lot of work to really kind of do that kind of an analysis for all of the needs and all of the demographics.
I mean, I would also say like water. I know water has its own fund now, but when water was part of the operating budget, Like if we cut water, we can't grow. So that precludes new revenue. So that would be another example of the analysis that I think we should be doing, is to look on not just the face value of things on the budget, but the net effect of items on the budget. From even just from a pure financial standpoint, not even taking into account the various interests of the voters, but just from a pure financial standpoint, what is the net financial impact of something? And that net financial impact is not necessarily the face value.
And that's a prioritization discussion. I guess I would ask, like Jillian or somebody, are we doing that in budget subcommittee where they have all the town boards represented or not? Do we do that? Jillian, can you answer? I don't know who else is here. Who else is on the budget subcommittee?
Peter.
Oh, Peter, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Jillian. Sorry.
I would say it's not necessarily talked about priorities. It's more talked about like topics at certain meetings. Like where the purpose of the budget subcommittee meeting is to sort of get the different committees on the same page. It's not to be a governing body, is my understanding, or to make decisions like that, to prioritize things. What do you think, Peter?
I actually think it's supposed to be that, but it doesn't function that way. Yeah, it's much more an update situation. Yeah, at this point, I mean, it really is, everybody's deferring to Greg to wait for him to come out with a budget. And I mean, nobody's articulating broad changes to the budget. I mean, all this discussion we've had tonight, efficiencies and, analyzing budget trends. I mean, I think most of the people in the room for February know the long list of issues we have. And, we can rank them and do different things, but it's going to be the same, I don't know, probably 8 to 10 things. Yeah, I'm not sure part of the lack of planning might be that we kind of know this, we know it doesn't look good in the future, and we are just struggling to get through. I don't know that I'm ready to articulate, we talk, education is so much a piece of the budget that even cutting operating budget isn't going to get you very much, but I'm not ready to say we should be cutting general government to fund the schools. We just talked about the lack of a capital line. We don't have a capital line because we're giving the money to the schools. And I mean, that's just the basic thing. So anything we want to do school-wise, absent some longer term, larger revenue thing, it comes either as an override or it's got to come from somebody else. And yeah, I don't know, maybe it's the path of least resistance, but I'm also reasonably comfortable with this budget that I'm not sure I'm advocating for much of a change. It kind of sucks for the schools, but I'm not sure I'm ready to support an override. And I go back and forth. And part of the lack of an override is looking at that $645 we have to pay for Green Meadow, and knowing there's water stuff coming too. So maybe that means we are just stuck on Maynard education. And I'm not sure. And so the presenting of the problems, the presenting of the data, yes, we could do that. I think most people know that. Does anybody want to advocate for some change in this year's budget that's going to, make a change, either more money for capital, more money for education? And I'm not sure I have that message to give. And that would be the valuable thing we could give. I think most people know the long list of problems. And, it's not that it hurts to review it. So anyway, that absent somebody standing up and saying we need to change this, yeah, I'm not sure what our message is for February, unless somebody wants to change something. So that would be the good thing. But yeah, ideally, budget subcommittee would function a little bit that way. If it's not FinCom, or select board. But it doesn't function that way. We don't do it there, and we don't do it here that much sometimes. So
Okay.
Well,
Again,
it kind
sorry
of,
to be
doesn't that kind of mean that it's the FinCom's job as an oversight kind of independent review group to basically state, there's missed opportunities here with the budget subcommittee and wherever else? Are we all mature enough to be able to do that without being defensive, do you think?
yeah, I mean,
to
I
me,
think
that's
we
kind of
could.
process. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think we can talk about it, but yeah, it would probably be up for some discussion between the three boards on what we want the budget subcommittee to really do and be, so that there's consensus. If it doesn't feel like it's providing a lot of value, to us now, what would make it provide more value between the three boards that are involved in it? I think that's like a tri-board discussion.
But even I don't think the budget subcommittee is going to be any different than we are. Who does somebody want to say this is what should change? You're saying, the budget subcommittee should do this function of, setting priorities and allocating money or whatever. I'm not sure what's the great idea that we want to change, that we would want them to do. And absent that, it's kind of just a processy thing.
So do you know what the priorities are for the budget subcommittee or the select board? Do you know that I understand they went through a process. Where is that even published or shared?
Sort of the charge of the budget subcommittee, you mean, Bob?
No,
Like, what are they
I mean,
charged with?
got it. That's a bridge too far.
I don't know what you're
Oh.
talking about.
I'm saying that I've heard that in May, we do planning sessions and priority setting and that sort of thing. And then nobody can remember what they decided. Huh?
They didn't decide anything. It's general.
Well, that's a problem.
It's like
I
master
think that should be
plan.
fixed. I would be willing to say that in the February meeting, whether I'm on a committee or not.
So
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to say it just so I'll let you
Okay.
guys know if you're not.
All right. We have a
Fine.
couple more things to do, and we are headed towards 10 o'clock. So if there are
Natasha was
final,
asking, just so you know.
yeah, if there are some final comments, go ahead,
I'll yield to
Natasha. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to, nothing that requires a response now, but I know that it has come up in the budget subcommittee, and it's only been a conversation really with the school versus, or hearing feedback from the town, Greg and the select board about Medicaid reimbursement, because I think ideally that is one area that the school does bring in revenue that, would not, if that money could be directed back to the school to help fund the school, because it is effort that they do undertake, that might be less because it has been coming in higher than anticipated. That might be one way. I think we've always looking for revenue opportunities that would have us rely less on the town taxpayer to fund our budget. So I would want to hear at some point maybe what FinCom's perspective on that possibility, maybe not as a long-term solution, but if we're just talking about, FY24, there are different ways that has happened at different towns. I've seen some towns, they put it as an article from the free cash allocation, and they will direct it to schools. Some of them, build it in, like Maynard does it, into the larger pot. So I don't know. It's not, substantial amount. It's not going to meet us all the way, but it is, a good chunk that may help. And it kind of goes back to the intent of offsetting those special education expenses, if that's a possibility. So I'd just be wondering, what FinCom's thought might be on that in the future.
So Bob, you asked if someone was willing, or I think Pete, you asked if someone was willing to take a stand. I'll be willing to take a stand for something. I think we should be funding the clerical work needed to get the information needed for those Medicaid reimbursements. I think that is a revenue generating activity that we are not funding right now. So I do think we should be funding that clerical work to get those Medicaid
Right, but
reimbursements.
the real question is, what are you going to cut to do it?
Well, that's the next question. I think we should be funding it, and I'll look for something to cut to.
That's the only question.
Well,
But,
the,
yep.
the way I would prioritize is I would look, as I said, what the knock-on effects are. And the item that has,
It's no. Yeah, all right. So you should do that, and you should come back with a specific thing.
Yep.
This is where I'm going to get my $40,000. But I mean, that I think is our function. That is budget subcommittee's function. I generally think the town is fairly well run. I think we make good decisions. I think there's a reason why, we devote whatever percent to schools and stuff, but we're stuck without very much money.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't mean to say we can't do anything. We should try to be efficient, but short of saying I'm going to cut $40,000 to give the schools this stuff, that's what you got to say.
I would want to be sure that they can't do it another way. I mean, they figured it out with the athletic director last year, and that was something that brought people to change their budget on town meeting floor so that they could afford, and they ended up affording it anyway.
well,
So
my concern as well, as long as they're not incentivized to do it right now, because as was pointed out, they do all the work to get those Medicaid reimbursements, and then it goes into the general fund, and they probably don't get the credit for generating those revenue. I think short term we should be funding that. Long term, we should be setting up a special account to receive that Medicaid reimbursement, and that should be factored automatically into the school budget. And that would
Yeah.
properly incentivize the schools.
well, there's
to
a
do
lot
the
of revenue
clerical
that
work.
comes into the town and then gets sent to the school's budget. That isn't, I mean,
Mhm.
it is in the schools. We
Yeah,
could
it doesn't change
haggle it.
much.
We could haggle it and make sure there's one line item for one specific amount, but there's still
Yeah, but if
$22
it was the
million.
intent, if the intent of that money was supposed to be for offsetting licensed dog, dog care, I would say like a dog license. That was an example that was posed to me. If the intent of that money was to support the animal, the officer or whatever, then yes, I would say you should be trying to adhere to the intent when all things in purpose. The intent of that program, the Medicaid school reimbursement program, is to offset the special education costs and the services that are provided. And that's what we go through the effort of. And that's not exactly how it's happening. Now, I know that's a town decision or that's been made. So if there's a program that is intended to be a certain way and it's not being funded for what it's intended, then I think that should be a conversation from a budget committee.
So the trouble with this line of reasoning is that you're still going to end up, you have a certain part of the pie, certain piece of pie that
Yeah.
we get from various revenue sources. And if we earmark that just to go to schools, to, Peter's point before, we have to take it away from somewhere else, which the target that gets some of the largest share is schools already, only because it's 2% and a lot less dollars for, say, general government or public safety. So it doesn't change the bottom line that the pie isn't big enough.
Well,
So,
it comes in is that we're coming in over budget every time for Medicaid reimbursement, and so that goes into free cash. So that's the part that it's just the amount of the reimbursement has substantially gone up
Sure.
year to year because of that work, and it
Yeah.
seems that's what it is. If it was just like 30,000 a
Yeah.
year, it's going up to like 200,000. So that's
Yeah.
why it's becoming a larger
And
substantial amount.
So that mechanism is one of the things that I think is a small piece of the pie, small bucket item. I think if you're really talking about what we should be talking about in the very nearest term, it doesn't meet the cost target or the benefit target that I think we should have.
Yeah, I think
So-
we just have to be careful because it's a slippery slope. There's a lot of places where we could be like, okay, so all of the car excise tax money that comes in has to be earmarked for the roads or something like, I mean, I think there's a lot of these sort of
but it's
avenues
different.
that we could. No, I understand.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing your argument. I am.
It's
I
different
think
with
we
the
have to look
schools,
at it
Alana,
more
though.
closely.
It's different with the schools because we as a town cannot specify how the schools spend their operating budget. That is at the discretion
That is a
of,
difference.
that is a key difference. This is why I want to set up the fund. It's to incentivize the school administrators to direct the money towards this clerical activity to this revenue generating activity. This is why I want the special fund, because
Can't set up a
otherwise we
special
cannot
fund
control
For any
how
reason.
that money is spent. So I want to create this fund as an assurance that if we create this special fund, the school superintendent is going to spend that money on the clerical services needed to generate that revenue. That's why I want the special
Lori,
fund,
what was
because of
your
that key
point?
difference.
Okay.
Problem
what
is,
would-
Kevin, you can't set up a special fund just because you want to. There are rules and laws regarding what money where money has to go and what you can set up a special fund for. So
Other
you
towns
can't
do
just
have a
decide
special
you want
fund,
to take
though.
a revenue source and put it into a fund. It just, the law does not allow for that.
But Lori, other schools do have a fund for these Medicaid revenues. Other schools have set up a fund for these Medicaid revenues. I looked at this a little while back. If I don't have it handy right now because this topic just came up, but if you give me a little bit, I'll send you an email of some examples of towns that have set up funds for these Medicaid revenues.
And
Okay.
just because they have it doesn't mean it's right. So just remember that too.
Well,
Just
that's why
because
we
another town is doing it
have town council.
doesn't always
for it.
mean it's
Yeah.
correct.
That's why town council is
Okay.
earning its 8% increase or whatever.
No,
it
they
is.
don't do it. They don't look at that. It's the Department of Revenue that looks
Yeah.
at that, not town council.
All right.
Or auditor.
Let's continue this discussion, of course, at our next meeting. And I will try at our next meeting to start having some bullet items, presentation, slide type things that we can start going over. But it is 10 o'clock, so let's move on and let's do our minutes really quickly as our next item. And thank you, Katie, for setting those along. I'll bring them up real quick here. If everyone can see that. So this was a while ago. Hope you all had a nice holiday break. Happy New Year. And if there is nothing, or if there's any discussion, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, any further discussion? Then we'll do a roll call vote. Kevin,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes,
Katie,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to some chair and member updates. For me, for chair updates, so there are two groups that have just formed or are forming that I think are important for us to have representation on. One is the trash committee that is looking at how that is going to move forward with a new contract. The other is the 61 Summer, the art space building, is forming a committee on that as well, that the select board has decided they want to do. I had some further discussion with the chair of the select board and Greg on what our role in that should look like. And as we are not a voting member, of course, of any other boards, they're looking to have a pretty tight committee. I think they're looking at 5. They already have, I think, 7 applicants. So FinCom is going to have a liaison to that committee. We're not going to be part of the applicants. We don't have to apply because we're special. So we will just be on it, one of us, as a non-voting member. So Ken had sent an email that he was interested, but Ken, as Lindy, your wife, has also put in an application, I believe, for that.
Yeah,
So
just to be clear about that, I sent you an email saying I thought we ought to have somebody on it.
yes, yes. And that
Okay,
you
and
would be willing,
I
you would
also
be willing if you,
volunteered that if there wasn't a more, you know, if
correct,
no one else was interested, I was happy to be on it, but
right.
I just wanted to clarify.
Sure. So I just want to say the thought process being that Lindy is likely will be one of the chosen candidates, perhaps. So we'll have somebody else from this committee be the other representative.
It's fine with me.
Okay. I think I would like to be the liaison to that committee because I am very interested in it, but also if anybody else has a burning desire, then I would defer. Okay, so that being said, I thought it would be a little too challenging for me to do that plus select board and the trash committee. So I knew that Kevin had some interest in the trash subject and reached out to him to see if he would want to be our liaison on that committee, and I would be the liaison for the new art space committee. He agreed to that with the caveat that it's possible that the timing of it may get tricky for him in the future due to work obligations, but for right now, he thought it would work. So if everybody else is in agreement with those two new liaisons, then we will go ahead with that. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you both for doing it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you for stepping up.
All right. So that's that. And
So
Kevin, I
could
will
I ask
let.
one question?
Yeah, sure. Mhm.
So on the art space committee,
Mhm.
so, you know, we've had discussions about this. I was wondering about the chartering of that committee. Are they looking broadly at the options for that building? You know, in terms of a fuller range of options that might include, you know, say residential development or something like along those lines?
Yes, I believe the charge for the committee is going to be to do a broad look at what is even legal, what is possible, what zoning, what blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And then go back to the select board with like 3 to 4 options.
Yeah, okay.
And then the select board will go from there and into the process of figuring out what may actually be the best one to go with.
Yeah.
But yes, I do believe it is going to be a broad. I will make sure that we really figure out what we can do with that space.
Well, so, you know, I mean, the reason why I ask is, I mean, you know, we're sitting here talking about maximizing revenues, taking a property off of the town's maintenance budget and putting it on the tax rolls, I think has got to be an option here.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I do not believe that there is much palette for maintaining that, for keeping that building in the town's ownership. But that may just be my perception, but I think at this point, that is not really something that the select board is particularly looking to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this and then last, you know, so, you know, someone approached me and said, you know, this is something for the town, you know, in terms of the, you know, art space being in there. This was something that was a benefit to the town. And, you know, I sort of challenged back and said, you know, articulate what that benefit was, because, you know, I know that what the town was spending, but I don't really understand what the you know, the town is. And it's like, well, you know, it doesn't really cost the town. I'm like, well, you know, the town is the taxpayers. And so, you know, the taxpayers to sit there and say that, you know, there's some group, no matter how admirable that group is, that, you know, we, you know, essentially fund a clubhouse for them. You know, I think there's got to be a greater benefit for anything. So if there's any sort of thinking about going back that direction, I certainly hope we're thinking about it. So I'm glad.
I mean, it may be one of the options presented, certainly. but whether that would be the one that gets further, really
Yeah.
gets further down the road, I would find that surprising to me. All right, I think that's it for my updates. Do other members have updates they would like to share about their subcommittees or liaisons or anything like that? Kevin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I unfortunately, my entire family fell ill after New Year's, so I
Oh,
unfortunately
I'm
had to.
sorry.
Yeah, miss the committee. I had to miss the committee meeting. We were not in good shape.
That's all right.
You know, so
Um,
but I understand from the agenda that Natasha did get the updated CPA proposal in for the bleachers, or I guess Natasha notified that the application was submitted, and
Okay.
so I believe the application was discussed. I did not see the YouTube video posted before this meeting. Otherwise, I
okay.
would have watched it and caught up. But yeah, so that's
Not a problem.
That's my update. I think everything else I discussed. Thank you, Bob and Lori, for that tool. It's immensely useful, and as you can see, I've been making great use of it. I'm probably going to be one of your power users for that.
Okay.
So I'll certainly email you, Bob. Can I email you with feature requests or just adding things in? I think my biggest request would be if we could add more years in. Because my overriding concern right now is that we have too few data points and we're having a lot of influence from both random noise and possibly COVID. And so we can.
I'll just say this very briefly. We've done this at least 10 different ways. I'm not interested in putting a lot more years out if people don't think there's benefit in really digging into the next 3. So sometime after February, if it has benefit that really requires much more effort on it, I'm wildly interested. But I'd also want, somebody there, owning the whole thing with me, because I'm not even part of the official part of the group. And I'm going for new revenue, by the way. I'm spending most of my time there.
So I would volunteer if we want to create a subcommittee or a volunteer position. I would volunteer to be the owner of the Bob spreadsheet model, since Danielle is no longer with us. I would volunteer if no one else has an interest in it.
I don't think I have particularly the best Excel, what do you call it? Chops. So I'm happy to hand the ownership of it to somebody else. So
yeah.
I think if you and Bob want to do any discussion on that and tweaking and have anything else you want to bring back to us, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm especially interested in doing some regression analysis on some of the things I talked about, like estimating those knock-on effects. I think some of them could actually be estimated if I had more data points.
One last caveat then in this is that I'm hoping that it's a tool that can be used jointly by the select board, the finance department, and FinCom, and schools for that matter. And because of that, you want to make sure you line up with especially Lori and somebody on the select board to say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and making sure that everybody wants it to go that direction. Because otherwise now we have multiple models.
So
yes, but I think there is some room in there to be sure we have the model. And then if there's something particular Kevin wants to go, off on
I could definitely fork
down a rabbit hole with, then he can take that and do what he wants with it and then bring it back. But the actual, Lori will be the keeper of the model.
Highly recommend.
We need to go back and be like, we broke it. Lori,
once
where's
it's at a
the
certain
model?
point, I think you want to get somebody to help graph some of these things.
Do
we've
we
done
want
that in the past too?
Let me just echo on to Bob's comment there. I think making sure that there are graphical representations of the data is a very important part of converting this to a useful product for the town meeting voter audience.
I agree.
So,
and just before you start doing anything, Kevin, wait for Lori to change the representation of the benefits that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, the liability insurance and how it's represented.
So she'll fix that first, and then we can go from there.
And
so when she gets that to me, by the way, I'll email you, because I've got your email, and then you'll have mine.
I'll send it out tomorrow morning.
And also 2 points. Question for the chair. Do we want to form a joint subcommittee with the other boards that Bob mentioned? Just as like a user group for the model to like ask for like additional features or get alignment on like how we use it? Or do
That
you think
isn't the
that's too
budget
much?
subcommittee that's already formed. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
That's my
good
2 cents.
question. That's a good question. We'll think about that a little bit. Yeah.
Do you
Because
think that, yeah, I
I'm
mean, you could
so-
ask Jillian and Peter, who are members of the current budget subcommittee, that, you know, this tool they need to know all of this stuff and the
Yeah.
projections. So why would you have a separate one? I would.
I'm
and-
on it and I echo that.
Yeah.
All right, great.
So let me also put the offer out there to this committee for starters. If you have any requests for like charts and graphs, I could certainly put it together. If not,
Okay.
if Lori's unavailable, I could certainly use my Excel skills to
That would be
put together.
appreciated. I have
Yeah.
a million other things to
Yeah,
do.
Yeah,
you have a
I
million
think-
other things too. So
Yeah, I think
So-
making things pretty would be on our shoulders.
I
I
appreciate
can make things really pretty. I could do more than just Excel. So I could
Well, by the
actually,
time it comes to around April, a month before the town meeting, I think you want to have something that could be presented in graphical format, either as a Word document, as a PowerPoint, something that can be shared that way.
Yes,
So-
now that we're going back to regular town meeting, Kevin's only really known, and a lot of the
Yeah.
newer members have only really known COVID town meeting where
Yeah,
it is quick and
You can't-
dirty and we didn't
Yeah.
say anything. So we will
Yeah.
definitely go back to probably some presentation at annual
Yeah.
town meeting.
Great.
All right, any other members have updates that they would like to share? Okay,
There is a budget subcommittee meeting tomorrow.
indeed. Thank you for that and going to that. All right, well, if there's no other updates, then I think I would entertain a motion. Who wants to make it? Who wants to get out of here?
I moved
I
to
will
adjourn.
make a motion to, oh, I beat you to adjourn the meeting for January 9th.
Okay, do
I
I have a
second.
second? Excellent. Then we'll do a roll call. Kevin,
Aye.
Katie,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
and Jillian.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. I know this was long meeting and I really appreciate all the good discussion and, you know, budget
Thank
season.
you. Thank
Rah.
you, everybody.
happy 2023.
Everybody get some sleep.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.